Chapter 1918. Standing in midair, Nie Tian looked down at Wu Yen with an expressionless face and said, "Wu Yen, you've lost." At this moment, Wu Yen stood up with great difficulty. Her entire body was covered in blood, and her eyes were somewhat lifeless. She said in shock, I lost." He couldn't believe what he was seeing. He, a paramount god, the Shenwu Sword Soul of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, had been defeated by someone he had called trash. But whether he believed it or not, the truth was right in front of him. He had been defeated by Nie Tian. Lian Wui walked over and looked at Wu Yen. "Wu Yen, I told you long ago that you're no match for Nie Tian. You didn't listen and insisted on fighting. Now you're regretting it, aren't you?" "Junior sister, Wu Yen looked up at Lian Wui. His face was pale and he couldn't speak. He had wanted to prove the strength of the Shenwu Sword Soul, but Nie Tian was too strange and had defeated him. The Shenwu Sword Soul was even more useless now. "Let's go." Nie Tian's figure flickered, and he directly landed beside Jian Jingyun. There were too many people in the sword field. Staying here would only attract more people, so Nie Tian wanted to leave. "Wait!" However, just as Nie Tian was about to turn around, Wu Yan's voice suddenly sounded. Nie Tian suddenly turned around and stared at Wu Yan, his eyebrows furrowed. "Wu Yan, do you still want to continue?" Lian Wui's eyes flashed and she said in surprise. The crowd looked at Wu Yan in confusion. They wanted to know what he was going to do. Wu Yan looked at Nie Tian hesitantly. After a while, he stepped forward and said, "Nie Tian, thank you for showing mercy." The crowd was stunned. They didn't expect Wu Yan to apologize. Wu Yan wasn't a fool. How could he not tell that Nie Tian had held back just now? Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to stand here and talk. "You're welcome." Nie Tian was also surprised. Then he smiled and said, "It's just a normal competition. There's no need to risk your life." Wu Yan's face turned red when he heard Nie Tian's words. During the battle just now, he had been thoroughly enraged by Nie Tian, and couldn't wait to kill him with every swing of his sword. But Nie Tian didn't want to kill him, which made him feel ashamed. "Wu Yan, Liang Chao is your subordinate, right? I hope you can keep him in check, and make sure he doesn't get too arrogant." Nie Tian pondered for a moment before turning around and leaving. Wu Yan looked at Nie Tian's back with a stiff face. Then he turned to Liang Chao and shouted, "Liang Chao, what is going on?" Brother Wu Yan, Liang Chao walked over slowly. He was terrified. His teeth were chattering. He was a completely different person from when he first entered the city. After Nie Tian and the others left the sword field, they went straight to the city lord's mansion. On the way, Nie Tian asked about Lian Wui's background. She was an abandoned baby. Xian Zongfeng took her in as a disciple. This made Nie Tian even more certain that the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body was planted by Xian Zongfeng. Lian Wui didn't know why Nie Tian suddenly asked about her background. She said happily, "Teacher loves me very much. He only wants me to focus on cultivation. I've never left the Shenwu city in my life." Nie Tian smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Xian Zongfeng treated Lian Wui as a vessel to cultivate his sword intent. Of course, he wouldn't let her leave the Shenwu city. Soon, Nie Tian and the others returned to the city lord's mansion. Nie Tian, Jian Jingyun, and Gui Wuchan returned to the courtyard, while Sakura left with Lian Wui. Nie Tian returned to his room and calmed himself down. He planned to cultivate for the next few days. He could feel the signs of advancing to the peak of the high god stage. He believed that he would be able to improve his strength in a few days. Nie Tian took out the 9 extremities and was ready to enter it to cultivate. With a thought, the 9 extremities released a space-time tunnel and he stepped into it. Nie Tian entered the tunnel, but his divine sense could still perceive everything outside. The 9 extremities world is really not bad. This was the first time Nie Tian entered the 9 extremities world. Previously, he had sensed everything inside the Nine Extremities world. This was the first time he entered it himself. In the Nine Extremities world, it was full of flowers and vitality, and the aura of spirit power was very strong. These exotic flowers and rare herbs had all been obtained from the Holy Mother of Jiuying. Any one of them was extremely precious. Nye Tian, let me take a good look and see how many good things there are in the Nine Extremities. At this time, the figure of Fat Cat appeared. He looked around with a pair of glowing eyes and murmured. Because Fat Cat had to cultivate in the celestial demon nascent embryo, he rarely visited the Nine Extremities. Nye Tian smiled and gestured to Fat Cat to do as he pleased. Then, Nye Tian looked at the 9 scarlet rings in the sky. They were the path of slaughter. He knew that the slaughter venerable demon was helping Rui Qianyu integrate the slaughter inheritance at this moment. Nye Tian's divine sense couldn't enter the path of slaughter, and he didn't know what was inside. He could only wait patiently. The figure of Fat Cat quickly disappeared into the Nine Extremities. Nye Tian didn't care about him. Instead, he sat cross-legged and entered a state of cultivation. As his divine sense entered the chaotic original coffin, Nye Tian felt the vast power of chaos in the coffin. His expression changed. This power of chaos was absorbed from the path of slaughter. Until now, Nye Tian still didn't know what this power of chaos was for. At this time, Nye Tian suddenly looked at the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast. He couldn't help but narrow his eyes, and his expression became one of shock. He suddenly realized that the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast was actually absorbing the power of chaos. This! Nye Tian gasped. He was stunned by the scene in front of him. The Nine Extremities Chaos Beast was absorbing the power of chaos. This was too strange. Actually, Nye Tian had used the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast before. At that time, he felt that the power of chaos had some effect on the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast. However, he didn't expect that the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast could actually directly absorb the power of chaos. Until now, Nye Tian still didn't know what kind of power the power of chaos was. However, the previous time the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast came out, Nye Tian clearly felt that the power of the Chaos Beast was much scarier than he had expected. When he was fighting Bu Wu Qianqiu, if he didn't have the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast, it would really be difficult for him to deal with the body of the Black Lotus. What kind of effect did the power of chaos have on the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast? Nye Tian frowned. He carefully felt the changes in the body of the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast. He felt that after the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast absorbed the power of chaos, the blood and meridians in the beast's body were obviously strengthened. The power of chaos was even changing the aura of the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast. Nye Tian faintly felt that inside the body of the Nine Extremities Chaos Beast, a huge and boundless power was slowly awakening. Chapter 1919. Nye Tian could clearly feel that something terrible was happening inside the Nine-Pole Chaos Beast's body. This made him feel uneasy and excited at the same time. At that moment, he suddenly thought of something the Nine-Pole Chaos Beast had said when it was born. His mouth twitched as he murmured, "The 9 transformations of chaos, born from nothingness." What does that mean? The 9 transformations of chaos, born from nothingness. This sentence had appeared in Nye Tian's spiritual consciousness when the Nine-Pole Chaos Beast had been born. Nye Tian could understand what it meant to be born from nothingness. Back then, the 9th-level Chaos Beast had been born from nothingness within the Primal Chaos original coffin. However, he could not understand the 9 transformations of chaos. The 9 transformations of chaos. Does the 9-pole Chaos Beast have to go through 9 transformations? Nye Tian guessed. His frown deepened. The Chaos 9 extreme beasts had indeed gone through a lot of changes from their adorable appearance when they were born to their current image of a domineering emperor. However, these changes were very normal growth processes and could not be considered as a qualitative change. Tian could vaguely feel that the power of chaos was causing the nine-pole chaos beast to go through a strange change. Perhaps the power of chaos was the beginning of the 9 transformations of chaos. Tian did not know how shocked the massacring demon Venerable had been when he had used the 9-pole chaos beast. According to the massacring demon Venerable, the 9-pole chaos beast was a primordial spirit that should not appear in the realm. The massacring demon Venerable did not understand why the 9-pole chaos beast would appear in the realm and in Tian's body. Tian was shocked when he felt the changes in the 9-pole chaos beast. However, he could not understand what was going on. In the end, he could only let it go. Next, Tian began to cultivate in the chaotic original coffin. Before this, he had already felt signs of leveling up. Now, as long as he cultivated hard for a few days, he would definitely succeed. 3 days later, Tian stood up again. His whole body released a sharp aura. His aura was much stronger. He had successfully leveled up. His strength had risen from late-stage high-level god to peak-level high-level god. Of course, his overall battle prowess wasn't going to improve by much. After all, most of his opponents were paramount gods. Once I become an overgod, my battle prowess will definitely increase qualitatively. Tian's lips curled up slightly as he murmured. His current battle prowess was not too powerful. It had increased slightly compared to before, but he was one step closer to overgod. If Tian's strength increased to the level of overgod, he would be able to awaken another layer of stellar power within the stellar domain. This would definitely increase Tian's overall battle prowess tremendously. Moreover, Tian believed that as long as he reached overgod, his 9 extremes art of war god would advance further with the laws of overgods. Right now, Tian's 9 extremities war god art had only reached the 6th stage, the extreme wind firmament realm. There was still a huge gap between him and the 9th stage. Tian was filled with anticipation. If he could reach the 9th stage of the 9 extremities war god art and obtain the body of the war god, just how terrifying would he become? However, all of that was still too far away for him right now. Right now, focusing on what was before him was the most important thing. 3 days have passed. I wonder if the master of the divine sword has ended his seclusion? Tian's lips curled into a smile as he prepared to leave the 9 extremities world. However, at this moment, Fat Cat appeared. With a nimble leap, he landed on Tian's shoulder. Fat, are you all right? Tian could not help but ask in worry when he saw that Fat Cat was covered in cold sweat and did not look too well. He remembered that there were no powerful beasts in the 9 extremities world. How did Fat Cat end up in such a sorry state? I'm fine. Fat Cat shook his head and laughed bitterly. The blood-weeping sword infant is too terrifying. It's really not easy to find a way to restrain it. Tian's gaze slightly froze. He immediately realized that Fat Cat had been searching for a way to restrain the blood-weeping sword infant these past few days. During the 3 days that Tian was cultivating, Fat Cat had been searching for a suitable exotic plant and experimenting nonstop, hoping to find a way to restrain the blood-weeping sword infant. Unfortunately, after 3 days, Fat Cat did not succeed. Fat, the blood-weeping sword infant is an evil technique. How can it be so easy to find a way to restrain it? Tian smiled faintly and comforted Fat Cat. Fat Cat shook his head and said, "The blood-weeping sword infant in that little girl's body is already in a state of agitation. Even if Tian is by her side, I reckon that he won't be able to hold on for long. I must find a way as soon as possible." Tian's expression changed. He asked in astonishment, "Is the situation with the dancing dress that urgent?" "Of course." Fat Cat let out a strange cry and said, "Otherwise, I wouldn't waste time in the 9 superbs. It's better to cultivate in the sea of divinity and demons." Tian frowned slightly. His gaze swept across Fat Cat's body and found that the latter still had 5 tails. It seemed that the nine-tailed chinchilla would find it more difficult to grow tails in the later stages of cultivation. Fat, do you still want to continue staying in the nine superbs? Nye Tian asked with a helpless smile. No. Fat Cat shook his head and said, the blood-weeping sword infant is too strange. It's not a solution to keep looking for it. It would be great if there was a blood-weeping sword infant for me to study. Nye Tian was speechless. The blood-weeping sword infant was not a good thing. What was the point of studying it? Nye Tian, let's go see that little girl first. I wonder how Di Tian is getting along with her. Fat Cat said and directly returned to the fiend god nascent embryo. Nye Tian nodded slightly. With a thought, he directly left the nine superbs. Nye Tian put away the nine superbs and walked out of the room. He first went to find Ghost Marshal Wild Sand and asked the latter about the situation of Divine Sword Master's closed-door cultivation. Unfortunately, Divine Sword Master still did not come out. Nye Tian also had no choice but to continue waiting. Jian Jingyun and Ghost Marshal Ken had been cultivating in the room. The blood mark seal in their body had not been completely undone. Nye Tian left the small courtyard and prepared to look for Lien Wui. But just as he walked out of the small courtyard, he saw Lien Wui's figure in the distance, and beside her was Di Tian. Di Tian reluctantly followed behind Lien Wui. When he saw Nye Tian, his eyes lit up. His figure moved and directly came to Nye Tian's side. Little brother Di Tian, why are you running so fast? Lien Wui saw that and hurriedly ran over. Nye Tian looked at Di Tian. The latter's small face was gloomy. It seemed that these few days were not going well. But this was also the time when there was no other way. Who asked Fat Cat to personally ask Di Tian to accompany Lien Wui? Nye Tian, where is Boss Chinchilla? Di Tian saw Nye Tian and asked anxiously. Why are you looking for this sovereign? Fat Cat directly appeared on Nye Tian's shoulder and looked at Di Tian with an unhappy face. Boss Chinchilla, I have already accompanied the little girl for 3 days. Can I return to the nine superbs now? Di Tian saw Fat Cat appear and hurriedly asked. It has only been a few days. Why are you so anxious? Fat Cat laughed mischievously. Then, he looked at Lien Wui and said, whenever Miss Lien feels that you can go back, you can come back. This. Di Tian's face was filled with black lines. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Chapter 1920. Lord Chinchilla, you're the best. Indra's face was gloomy, but Lien Wui was very happy. She looked at Fat Cat and said with a chuckle. Fat Cat smiled wretchedly, then his figure moved and directly landed on Lien Wui's shoulder. He said with a mischievous smile, Miss Lien, this lord is definitely the best person in the world. Lord Chinchilla is the best person in the world. Lien Wui nodded frantically and actually directly hugged Fat Cat in her arms. Nye Tian saw this scene and couldn't help but curl his lip. He said in his heart, I couldn't tell, but this guy Fat is really good at coaxing little girls. The reason why Fat Cat got close to Lien Wui was because he had no other choice. He had to be in close contact with the blood-weeping sword infant so that he could understand the blood-weeping sword infant better and find a way to restrain it. Fat Cat sensed Lien Wui's body for a while, and his face changed again and again. In the end, he didn't say anything but turned his gaze to Indra and said, Indra, you stayed by Miss Lien's side these few days, how's your guidance? This. Indra's face stiffened. He was actually a little embarrassed and couldn't say anything for a while. Don't tell me you didn't guide her? Seeing this, Fat Cat rolled his eyes and let out a strange cry. Indra nodded. He thought that Fat Cat was just saying it casually. He didn't expect that the latter really wanted him to guide Lien Wui. Seeing this, Lien Wui hurriedly said, Lord Chinchilla, actually, it's not little brother Shirtian's fault. I asked him to accompany me to go shopping. Go shopping? Hearing this word, Fat Cat and Nye Tian exclaimed at the same time. They were speechless. Little girl, you too have been going shopping these days? Fat Cat's face sank and asked gloomily. Yes. Lien Wui innocently blinked her eyes and asked, Can't little brother Shirtian go shopping? Little Fat Cat and Ye Tian looked at each other, feeling so depressed that they couldn't say anything. Lien Wui had a swordsman who had reached the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one by her side. She didn't allow the latter to give her some pointers on her swordsmanship and instead asked him to accompany her shopping. Sakura was also really formidable. He actually accompanied Lien Wui to stroll the street. Nye Tian had a look of helplessness on his face as he thought to himself, she's at least 1,000 years old. Why is she acting like a teenage girl? From this, it could be seen that apart from age, a person's maturity was also determined by what they had experienced. If one did not experience certain things, even if one lived for 10,000 years or 100,000 years, it would still be very difficult for a person to grow up. Take Lien Wui for example. Although she had lived for 1,000 years, she had always been cultivating and had never experienced anything. She had never even left the divine martial city. She was like a little flower in a greenhouse. Of course, she didn't know anything. If Xian Zongfeng knew that Lien Wui had the opportunity to stay with Sakura alone for 3 days, but she used it all to stroll the streets, it was unknown how he would react. Sakura, for the next period of time, you have to guide Lien Wui attentively, do you hear me? Fat Cat was a little angry. She stared at Sakura and said in a cold tone. Yes. Sakura nodded with an embarrassed expression. He would no longer treat Fat Cat's words as a joke. Okay, you guys go first. Fat Cat didn't want to continue talking. Her figure moved and returned to Nye Tian's body. Sakura had a depressed expression and could only leave with Lien Wui. Fat, did you discover something? Nye Tian couldn't help but frown as he looked at the back of Sakura and Lien Wui. He guessed that Fat Cat must have discovered something, that's why she was angry. Fat Cat nodded, then sighed and said, The blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body has become even more violent. I estimate that in a few months it won't be able to be suppressed. So soon? Nye Tian was stunned for a moment. His eyes couldn't help but tremble. Fat Cat shook her head and smiled bitterly. Lien Wui is already at the intermediate stage of sword and martial unity. Moreover, the blood-weeping sword infant has been planted in her body since she was young. Of course it's very strong. Fat, what will happen if the blood-weeping sword infant can't be suppressed? Nye Tian frowned and asked in a deep voice. If the blood-weeping sword infant is stronger than the host, it will break out of the host's body. The host will then explode and die. Fat Cat nodded and said. Her expression became solemn. This. Nye Tian sucked in a breath of cold air and was speechless. He had a good impression of Lien Wui. The latter was a rare genius swordsman. If she died like this, it would be a pity. The blood-weeping sword infant is inside Lien Wui's body. My senses are limited, so I can't learn more about the blood-weeping sword infant. It's very difficult to find a way to suppress it. Fat Cat sighed and disappeared. Nye Tian had a helpless expression. If even Fat Cat couldn't do anything, then he couldn't do anything about the blood-weeping sword infant. Nye Tian really wanted to find Xian Zongfeng and ask him if he was the one who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lien Wui's body. Nye Tian returned to his room and continued to cultivate and stabilize his realm. Before the Divine Sword Master's closed-door cultivation ended, he could only wait quietly. The night was deep like water, with a hint of coldness. Nye Tian stood alone in the courtyard, looking at the dark night, thinking of Mo Rushi and Cher. I wonder how Rushi and Cher are doing, murmured Nye Tian. His eyes were filled with deep longing. Come to think of it, it had been a year since he had parted ways with Mo Rushi and Cher. During this year, Nye Tian's strength had advanced by leaps and bounds, but the enemies he faced were too strong. His current strength was far from being able to compete with them. I have 9 years left. I must become a paramount god. Nie Tian said in a deep voice. His eyes were filled with unshakable determination. He was currently at the peak greater god level, and had to reach the paramount god level within 9 years. In anyone else's eyes, this would be an impossible task. However, Nie Tian firmly believed that he could accomplish it. It had only taken him a year to reach the peak greater god level, and he was confident that he would be able to reach the paramount god level within the next 9 years. But Nie Tian understood that the higher one got, the harder it was to increase one's strength. Especially after the overgod realm, every minor level of improvement was more difficult than a major level of improvement. But Nie Tian had a heart of steel. He would never give up. Just as Nie Tian was thinking about all this, he suddenly felt something strange in the space. He couldn't help but frown, and his expression changed. Someone's there. At the same time, Fat Cat's voice rang out. Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He activated the holographic divine glyph and spread out his divine sense. He found an aura flashing past, flying high into the sky. Who's there? Nie Tian growled. He took a step forward and shot up into the sky, following the weak aura in the air. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Nie Tian didn't have time to inform Guiwu Quangsha. He chased after it alone. Chapter 1921. 2 figures sped through the night sky, one in front of the other, like 2 phantoms. In the blink of an eye, the 2 figures had already left the Shenwu city and arrived at a dense forest outside the city. One of the 2 figures was Nie Tian. He looked around and faintly felt a trace of uneasiness. He couldn't help but furrow his brows. He became more cautious in his heart and slowed down his pace. Brat, it's too late to feel that something is wrong now. Seeing that Nie Tian had slowed down, the figure in front of him slowed down as well. Eventually, he came to a stop in the night sky, the corner of his mouth twitching as he spoke in a cold voice. Crap! Nie Tian's expression flickered, and he was just about to turn around when he sensed dozens of auras in the area. In the blink of an eye, dozens of black-garbed swordsmen appeared and surrounded Nie Tian. Nie Tian's expression flickered as he sent out his divine sense, and his heart sank. These swordsmen were very strong. The weakest of them was a peak overlord, and most were early paramount gods. Their cultivation bases in the Tao of the Sword were also at the level of selflessness. It's a trap! Nie Tian blurted, his expression grim. If Nie Tian had to fight these swordsmen one-on-one, he wouldn't be afraid. But if they teamed up, he wouldn't be a match for them. It really wasn't easy to lure you out, boy. The figure in the lead blurred into motion, moving over to stand next to Nie Tian. His face was hidden beneath a black robe, making it impossible to see his features. Nie Tian's eyes widened as he realized that this person was a mid-paramount god, and had reached the level of the Tao of the Sword. Who are you people? How dare you behave atrociously on Evil Wind Island? Nie Tian calmed down and said in a deep voice. The black-garbed man chuckled coldly at Nie Tian's words. You know this is Evil Edge Island, and yet you still dare to come out? You've got guts. Nie Tian's expression flickered as he realized that this person had intentionally exposed himself to lure him out. Who were these people? They actually dared to send out dozens of swordsmen at once. This was Evil Wind Island. If they were discovered by the people of the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda, they would definitely die. However, Nie Tian observed the expression of the man in black. He was not nervous at all, as if he was not worried about being discovered by the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. What are you trying to do by luring me here? Nie Tian forced himself to calm down and asked in a cold voice. The man in black smiled and said, Don't worry, we're not here to kill you. We're just here to give you a gift. Gifts? Nie Tian was stunned for a moment. He cursed in his heart, a bunch of weasels. They clearly have bad intentions. Why would they come to give gift? That's right, it's a gift. The man smiled again and said, You're very talented in the art of the sword. I'm afraid that even Lian Wui, the #1 genius in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, can't compare to you. As for me, I can make your talent even stronger. What do you mean? The corner of Nie Tian's mouth twitched. He suddenly thought of something and couldn't help but tremble. It's simple. I want to give you a gift to help you increase your talent in the art of the sword. You don't need to thank me. Just cooperate. The man in black smiled cold and sized up Nie Tian with an evil look. Nie Tian's eyes flickered, but his expression was calm. He had already guessed what the man in black was going to give him. The gift didn't scare Nie Tian. Instead, he was a little excited. Crimson Sword Soul. Just then, Fat Cat's excited voice was heard. He had also guessed that the gift the man in black was going to give to Nie Tian was the Crimson Sword Soul. The man in black said that the gift could increase one's talent in the art of the sword. He also mentioned Lianwui, which confirmed Nie Tian's thoughts. Fat Cat said that the Crimson Sword Soul would only grow faster in the body of a talented person. Therefore, it wasn't strange that these people came to Nie Tian. They thought that Nie Tian's talent was even greater than Lianwui's. Of course, they wanted to implant the Crimson Sword Soul in Nie Tian's body. Without a doubt, these people had seen how terrifying Nie Tian was. Fat, what should we do? Nie Tian became cold and asked excitedly. Nie Tian, this is a good opportunity. If this guy is really here to give you the Crimson Sword Soul, of course you have to accept it. Fat Cat was even more excited than Nie Tian. Nie Tian nodded. He had the same intention. He wanted to accept the Crimson Sword Soul. Although he knew that the Crimson Sword Soul was an evil art and was very dangerous, it could indeed increase his talent in the art of the sword. Moreover, the Crimson Sword Soul would need a long time to grow in Nie Tian's body. Therefore, before the Crimson Sword Soul was fully grown, it would only be beneficial to Nie Tian. As for the future, Nie Tian believed that Fat Cat would be able to find a way to restrain the Crimson Sword Soul. So, are you interested? The man in black saw that Nie Tian didn't say anything and asked. Nie Tian smiled faintly and calmed down completely. He said, I want to see what you want to give me first. Sure. The man in black was very straightforward. He smiled faintly and flipped his palm. A blood-colored vortex appeared in the center of his palm. When Nie Tian saw the blood-colored vortex, he couldn't help but frown. He suddenly felt an abnormal evil aura. At this moment, the man in black moved his palm slightly. The blood-colored vortex immediately underwent a strange change. It kept spinning and its color became even redder. There were even a few drops of blood dripping out. It looked very strange. The blood-colored vortex released an evil aura and filled the space. Nie Tian suddenly felt his whole body heat up. The blood in his body seemed to sense it and expanded. His whole body felt like it was about to burn. The sword essence in his body became violent and restless. Yes, this is the seed of the Crimson Sword Soul. At this moment, Fat Cat exclaimed, looking very excited. Although Nie Tian had already guessed it, he still felt excited when he confirmed that the thing in front of him was the Crimson Sword Soul. Previously, Fat Cat said that it would be great if he could have a Crimson Sword Soul for him to study. He didn't expect that the man in black would take the initiative to send the Crimson Sword Soul to him. This was exactly what Nie Tian and Fat Cat wanted. Nie Tian, you have already felt the stimulation from the Crimson Sword Soul. The man in black saw the passion in Nie Tian's eyes. It was obvious that he was very interested. He couldn't help but chuckle and said, How is it? Are you satisfied with this gift? Yes, very satisfied. Nie Tian laughed. The Crimson Sword Soul was sent to his doorstep. There was no reason for him to not be satisfied. So, you are willing to accept this gift? The man in black was startled for a moment. His eyes became passionate. Of course. Nie Tian smiled and said, Tell me, how do you need me to cooperate? Chapter 1922. The man in black's eyes flickered as he stared at Nie Tian. He originally thought that Nye Tian was a powerful character and would reject the Crimson Sword infant. He didn't expect the latter to be so passionate and eager to get his hands on the Crimson Sword infant. Humph. This brat is only SOSO. He must have felt that the Crimson Sword infant is good, that's why he's so cooperative. The man in black sneered and thought to himself, however, the Crimson Sword infant is not a good thing. You will find out in the future just how terrifying it is. Nye Tian didn't care about the man in black's reaction at all. He faintly smiled and said, "Now, can you give me the thing in your hand?" The man in black smiled and waved his hand. The Crimson Sword infant flew before Nye Tian. Nye Tian took the blood-weeping sword infant and sensed the peculiar aura within it from such a close distance. He instantly had a feeling that his sword intent was surging. The Crimson Sword infant sure is strange. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed as he thought to himself. He then looked at the man in black and asked, "What should I do next?" "Very simple. You only need to swallow the Crimson Sword infant." The man in black smiled. He couldn't help but feel nervous, afraid that Nye Tian would play some trick. "Okay," Nye Tian nodded and smiled. Without hesitation, he swallowed the Crimson Sword infant. Bang! The moment the sword nascent soul entered his body, Nye Tian felt a violent force rushing through his body, causing him to tremble involuntarily. Immediately after, all the meridians and blood in his body felt a burning pain, as if there were millions of ants gnawing on his body, causing him to feel a burning pain. "This feels good." Nye Tian let out a strange cry. The sudden sharp pain made his face contorted, making him look like a berserk wild beast. Bang! 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 In the next moment, the sword intent inside Nye Tian's body felt the impact of the Crimson Sword infant. He couldn't control it and began to crazily release it. Waves after waves of terrifying sword intent permeated the air, filling the entire space with a sharp chi. The black-robed swordsmen around Nye Tian retreated, not knowing what was going on. The black-clothed man looked at Nye Tian and frowned. He said in confusion, "When the blood-tear sword infant enters the swordsman's body, it will only slowly fuse with the swordsman's body. The process is very peaceful. Why is this kid so violent?" Just as the black-clothed man was feeling puzzled, Nye Tian raised his head to the sky and howled. His entire body emitted a sword aura that soared into the sky. It was sharp to the extreme, as if it wanted to tear the heavens and earth apart. How strange! The black-robed man frowned and immediately used his divine sense to probe Nye Tian. His face couldn't help but change. He could sense that there was a very strange power within Nye Tian's body that was clashing with the blood-tear sword nascent soul. It was as if this power was even more evil and terrifying than the blood-weeping sword infant. The black-clothed man was right. At this moment, Nye Tian's body was not only being attacked by the blood-weeping sword infant, but also by the power of the fiend god. The blood-weeping sword infant was an extremely evil power. When it entered Nye Tian's body, it unintentionally triggered the explosion of the power of the fiend god. The power of the fiend god and the blood-weeping sword infant, these two terrifying powers were clashing wantonly in Nye Tian's body. One could imagine the pain he was suffering at this moment. "Nye Tian, hang in there!" Fat Cat shouted anxiously. He also didn't expect that the blood-weeping sword infant would actually trigger the power of the fiend god. At this moment, Nye Tian's strength was at the peak of the high god stage. The fiend god original embryo in his body had awakened 256 strands of the power of the fiend god. It was already very terrifying. The power of the fiend god and the blood-weeping sword infant were clashing. The violent power that erupted from the clash was constantly attacking Nye Tian's martial body. If it weren't for the fact that he had the Terra Vein Source, the three great forbidden techniques, and the power of the stars, he would have already exploded and died. "Why is it so painful?" Nye Tian growled. Although his whole body felt like it was being torn apart, his consciousness was still clear. He felt that the pain at this moment was even more terrifying than when he had fused the three great forbidden techniques. What kind of power does this kid have in his body? How can it be so terrifying that it can actually resist the blood-weeping sword infant? The black-clothed man's expression changed again and again. He was extremely shocked by the power in Nie Tian's body. Fat Cat was also panicking at this moment. He looked horrified and didn't know what to do. Boom! The power of the fiend god turned into an invisible force that crazily attacked the blood-weeping sword infant. It was actually trying to penetrate into the blood-weeping sword infant. The blood-weeping sword infant constantly spun, releasing balls of blood-colored halos to resist the impact of the fiend god's power. However, as the fiend god's power continued to attack, the blood-colored halos around the blood-weeping sword infant became dimmer and dimmer. Its resistance also became weaker. Fiend god's power, attack for me. Nie Tian endured the sharp pain and roared in his heart. He controlled all the fiend god's power and turned it into a terrifying force that attacked the blood-weeping sword infant. He didn't know what would happen when the fiend god's power attacked the blood-weeping sword infant, but he had to do something. Otherwise, his martial body wouldn't be able to withstand this kind of impact. Boom! In the next moment, the fiend god's power attacked. Nie Tian's body suddenly trembled, and then the blood-weeping sword infant directly exploded, turning into countless blood-colored runes. The fiend god's power immediately condensed into a giant hand, directly wrapped around the blood-colored runes, and actually began to devour them. Nie Tian was stunned, completely stunned by the scene in front of him. In just an instant, the blood-weeping sword infant was directly devoured by the fiend god's power, and the blood-colored runes disappeared. Everything that happened so suddenly made Nie Tian take a deep breath. His face directly stiffened, and he couldn't speak for a long time. He had never thought that the fiend god's power would actually directly devour the blood-weeping sword infant. After the fiend god's power devoured the blood-weeping sword infant, it immediately returned to the fiend god's origin embryo. Nie Tian's body immediately calmed down, as if nothing had happened. The black-clothed man stood not far from Nie Tian. Feeling the blood-weeping sword infant's aura disappear from Nie Tian's body, his expression became incomparably strange and extremely ugly. Everything that happened in front of him was beyond his expectations, beyond his scope of understanding, and he couldn't accept it. Nie Tian was stunned for a full 10 seconds, and his stiff face finally showed a trace of a reaction. His mouth opened wide, but for a moment, he couldn't say a word. He also didn't know what was going on. The fiend god's power devoured the blood-weeping sword infant. Did it affect his body in any way? Nie Tian, why don't you try releasing the fiend god's power? At this time, Fat Cat suddenly made a strange sound, a little excited, as if it was eager to prove something. Although Nie Tian didn't understand, he still released the fiend god's power and carefully sensed it, but he didn't feel the blood-weeping sword infant's aura. The blood-weeping sword infant was completely devoured by the fiend god's power, and completely disappeared. Nie Tian couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He originally wanted to use the blood-weeping sword infant to improve his sword Dao strength. Nie Tian, release some of your sword intent and try to fuse with the fiend god's power. Fat Cat was extremely excited after sensing the fiend god's power, and said nervously. Chapter 1923. Sword will fuse with the power of the demon and god? Nie Tian was shocked when he heard Fat Cat's words. Previously, when he used the power of the demon and god, he had always used it alone. He had never fused it with other powers. Nie Tian believed that the power of the demon and god was too powerful to be fused with other powers. At this moment, Fat Cat asked him to fuse the sword will with the power of the demon and god. How could he not be surprised? Nie Tian, try it. Seeing that Nie Tian didn't move, Fat Cat hurriedly urged. Nie Tian was stunned. Although he was confused, he still did as Fat Cat said. He released a stream of sword will and slowly approached the power of the demon and god. At this moment, a strange scene happened. Whoosh! The power of the demon and god absorbed the sword will directly. The scene in front of him made Nie Tian gasp. He was shocked and said, "How is this possible?" The power of the demon and god absorbed Nie Tian's sword will directly. This was too strange, and Nie Tian couldn't accept it. Ha ha, it's like this. Completely different from Nie Tian's reaction, Fat Cat shouted in surprise and excitement. The power of the demon and god swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, and obtained the power of the blood-weeping sword infant. Hearing Fat Cat's words, Nie Tian frowned and his eyes trembled violently. According to Fat Cat, the power of the demon and god swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, so it obtained the power of the blood-weeping sword will. Nie Tian was stunned and only reacted after a long time. Because the power of the demon and god swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, it could absorb sword will and improve the sword will. This was too scary. Nie Tian tried to release the sword will in the power of the demon and god. Fat Cat was very excited and reminded Nie Tian. Okay. Nie Tian nodded heavily. With a thought, the sword intent absorbed by the fiend god power was released again. At this time, Nie Tian's expression changed, and he was quite shocked. He could clearly feel that the newly released sword intent was much stronger than before. This undoubtedly meant that the power of fiend gods really possessed the ability to enhance sword intent. That's great, that's really great. Nie Tian was overjoyed and he almost jumped up. After devouring the blood cry sword infant, Nie Tian had gained the power to improve his sword intent. In this way, he no longer had to worry about the blood cry sword infant going out of control, since it was no longer inside of him. In other words, Nie Tian had obtained the benefits of the blood-sobbing sword infant, yet he had completely avoided the threat of the blood-sobbing sword infant. How could he not be happy and excited? When the man in black saw Nie Tian's excited and ecstatic expression, his face sank, and his eyes flashed with cold, murderous intent. Although he didn't know what happened to Nie Tian, he didn't feel the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant. This undoubtedly meant that Nie Tian was not threatened by the blood-weeping sword infant. His mission this time was to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in Nie Tian's body. Now that the mission had failed, he could only kill Nie Tian directly. Huh! Nie Tian felt the cold, murderous intent released by the man in black. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows and he smiled faintly. What's wrong? Do you regret giving me this gift? Brat, what kind of power does your body have? The man in black's eyes were dark, and his eyes were full of murderous intent. Do you really want to know? Nie Tian laughed, and at the same time, the sword aura in his body accumulated, and he was ready to attack at any time. Damn it! The man in black roared. He was completely ferocious. He had failed to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in Nie Tian's body, so his mission had already failed. He had to kill Nie Tian now, or he wouldn't be able to answer to the person behind him. Everyone, kill him! The man in black roared when he thought of this, and he immediately gave the order to attack. Yes. The dozens of black-robed swordsmen replied in unison, their voices resounding. Stinking brat, die for me! In the next moment, one of the black-robed swordsmen let out a fierce roar and madly thrust his sword towards Nie Tian. Nie Tianling laughed. Terrifying black inscriptions surged around his body, and his aura skyrocketed, reaching the limit in an instant. He directly struck out with his sword, and the blurs of the sword surged, directly killing the swordsman in black. Nie Tian's strength had risen to peak high god. After using the 3 forbidden techniques, he had directly reached peak over god. It was extremely easy for him to kill a swordsman of the same level with a single strike. What a strange fellow! The expressions of the other swordsmen changed when they saw this, but they were not afraid at all. They attacked at the same time, and countless blurs of the sword appeared, like countless huge snakes, pressing towards Nye Tian. Nye Tian felt the pressure of the sword, and his expression changed slightly. Astral soul wings appeared on his back, and astral soul armor appeared on his body. Starlight heaven wildly slashed out, and the astral soul flame combined with the terrifying sword intent condensed into a flaming sword, whistling, and almost burning the heaven and earth. Rumble. A terrifying rumbling sound came from the sky. Nye Tian borrowed the power of the sword, and his silhouette rapidly retreated a few thousand meters away. At this moment there were no experts around him, so he didn't dare to continue fighting. So, it was better for him to leave as soon as possible. How can this brat be so strong? The joint attack of several dozen swordsmen, but Nye Tian actually managed to escape. One could imagine the shock in their hearts. A bunch of trash! That black-robed swordsman saw that Nye Tian wanted to leave, and he roared angrily. His silhouette flashed, and directly rushed over. Not good. Nye Tian thought, frowning. This black-robed swordsman was a mid-paramount god, and given his current level of strength, it would be very difficult for him to fight him. Starfire incinerates the sea. Nye Tian reacted quickly. Drawing on the power of his astral soul flame, he unleashed a 10,000-meter-long flaming sword that lit up the entire sky. You overestimate yourself, the black-robed swordsman said. Chuckling coldly, he slashed out with his sword, creating a blinding sword image that sliced the flaming sword image in two. Upon seeing this, Nye Tian's heart skipped a beat as he flapped his wings and retreated thousands of meters. The black-robed swordsman was far stronger than Nye Tian could have imagined, and his sword intent was even stronger than Nye Tian's. If he tried to fight him head-on, Nye Tian would definitely be at a disadvantage. Trying to run? The black-robed swordsman said. Laughing coldly, he blurred into motion like a sharp sword that whistled through the air. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected the black-robed swordsman to be so fast. This is bad. If I get tangled up with this guy, it'll be hard to get out of here. Nye Tian cursed inwardly. Even if it meant getting injured, he couldn't let the black-robed swordsman get close to him. However, it was in that exact moment that a fierce sword image pierced through the night sky like an enormous dragon, causing everything to tremble. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and the black-robed swordsman was sent flying backward. He let out a miserable shriek, and then went completely still. Nye Tian's eyes narrowed, and his lips curled up into a smile. You've come just in time, exalted Ghost Marshal. Nye Tian was no stranger to that sword image. It was none other than Ghost Marshal Wild Sand's sword intent. Chapter 1924. Nye Tian suddenly turned around and saw a figure flying over from the night sky. In the blink of an eye, it arrived beside him. It was Guiwu Kwangsha. Nye Tian, are you all right? Guiwu Kwangsha stood still and looked at Nye Tian with a nervous expression. I'm fine. Nye Tian faintly smiled and said, Lord Guiwu came at the right time. If you came a little later, I'm afraid something would have happened to me. Guiwu Kwangsha's eyes narrowed as he looked into the void. Those black-clothed swordsmen had already disappeared without a trace. Nye Tian, what's going on? Guiwu Kwangsha calmed down and asked. Nothing much. I just noticed that there were people outside our courtyard, so I followed them. Nye Tian played it down. He didn't want Guiwu Kwangsha to worry, so he didn't say anything about the blood-weeping sword infant. Someone is watching us? Guiwu Kwangsha's face sank as he roared. I'll go find Xian Zongfeng and ask him what's going on? They were actually being watched in the Divine Martial City's City Lord Mansion. Xian Zongfeng naturally couldn't escape responsibility. Just as Guiwu Kwangsha was getting angry, a voice rang out. Brother Guiwu, what's going on? A figure flew over and directly arrived beside Nye Tian and Guiwu Kwangsha. It was Xian Zongfeng. Why is he here? Nye Tian was stunned. He didn't expect Xian Zongfeng to appear at this time. Lord Swordmaster Wu, you came at the right time. I also want to ask you, what's going on? Guiwu Guangsha's face was full of anger as he rebuked, Why are we being watched in the City Lord Mansion? Being watched? Why do you say that? Xian Zongfeng was stunned for a moment. He had an innocent look on his face. Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng and faintly smiled. He signaled Guiwu Guangsha to calm down and said, Lord Swordmaster Wu, don't be nervous. Actually, it's nothing. I just felt that someone was hiding in our courtyard, so I chased after them. Those men in black have already left. They might be people from the Thousand Evil sect. Hearing Nie Tian's words, Xian Zongfeng's face sank and he roared, Damn the Thousand Evil sect! They must be here for revenge because I took the initiative to kill the North Sea's 3 evils. How dare you hide in the City Lord's mansion? Do you really think there's no one in the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda? Nie Tian looked at Xian Zongfeng's indignant face and smiled, but in his heart he sneered. Xian Zongfeng, you really know how to take advantage of the situation. I said it's someone from the Wanxie sect, and you really think it's someone from the sect. I think the most suspicious person should be you. The Shenwu City Lord residence was the most heavily guarded place in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. There were countless swordsmen with Shenwu sword souls guarding the entire residence. The fact that the man in black could sneak into the City Lord's mansion without anyone noticing was very strange in itself. What made Nie Tian even more suspicious was that no one from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda had appeared even though he had been fighting with the men in black for so long. The strangest thing was that Xian Zongfeng appeared right after the men in black were scared away by Guiwu Guangsha. This was too much of a coincidence. All the signs indicated that the men in black were not simple. It was very likely that they were from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Needless to say, the person who ordered them to do this was the person in front of him, Xian Zongfeng. Nie Tian, are you alright? Xian Zongfeng calmed down and looked at Nie Tian with a strange look in his eyes. Why did the man in black lead you here? He asked. Xian Zongfeng said while looking at Nie Tian, as if he was looking for something on Nie Tian. However, the usual result made him a little disappointed, and his face became a little gloomy. They didn't do anything. They just wanted to give me a gift. Nie Tian smiled and said while watching Xian Zongfeng's reaction. Gift? What gift? Xian Zongfeng was surprised and asked. Nie Tian smiled and said, It's a bloody whirlpool. According to the men in black, it's called something. He purposely pondered and secretly observed Xian Zongfeng's reaction. What is it called? Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled and he asked. I think it's called the Crimson Sword Soul. Nie Tian suddenly realized and nodded. It's called the Crimson Sword Soul. The Crimson Sword Soul. When Xian Zongfeng heard these 4 words, his pupils suddenly shrank and his expression changed. He was both shocked and surprised. Nie Tian saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction and couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. He thought, Xian Zongfeng, it's really you. Xian Zongfeng's reaction was shocked, but there was no doubt. This meant that he definitely knew about the Crimson Sword Soul. Nie Tian, the name Crimson Sword Soul is so evil. What is it? Guiwu Guangsha was stunned and asked with a frown. Comparing Xian Zongfeng and Guiwu Guangsha's reaction, Nie Tian was even more certain that Xian Zongfeng was the mastermind. I don't know. Nie Tian smiled and shook his head. He then looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, The men in black said that the Crimson Sword Soul can improve the swordsman's talent. He also said that Miss Lian Wui has the Crimson Sword Soul in her body. I wonder if it's true? Lian Wui. Hearing Nie Tian mention Lian Wui's name, Xian Zongfeng's eyes trembled again. His face was filled with horror and anger. He roared in his heart, Trash. A bunch of trash. You didn't even complete your task and you actually leaked so much information to others. What a bunch of idiots. Nie Tian was right. The group of men in black was sent by Xian Zongfeng. The crimson sword soul in Lian Wui's body was also planted by Xian Zongfeng. Everything was Xian Zongfeng's doing. "Swordmaster Wu, are you all right?" Nie Tian frowned and asked with concern when he saw Xian Zongfeng's reaction. If Nie Tian still had doubts about his guess before, he was completely convinced after seeing Xian Zongfeng's reaction. He never thought that the divine martial sword master, the pinnacle of swordsmanship in the 9 realms, would do such a despicable thing behind his back. Xian Zongfeng did not even let his own disciple go. This showed how vicious he was. I'm fine." Xian Zongfeng reacted and quickly covered it up. However, there were beads of sweat on his forehead. "It's good that you're fine." Nie Tian smiled faintly. Although he already knew what Xian Zongfeng had done, he could not do anything to him with his current strength. Therefore, he could only continue to pretend that he did not know anything. Nie Tian. At this moment, Xian Zongfeng's expression slightly changed. He suddenly asked, "Did you accept the crimson sword soul that the men in black gave you?" "Of course not." Nie Tian smiled and said, "I'm not an idiot. I don't know where those men in black came from. How could I accept their gift?" Chapter 1925. Xian Zongfeng roared in his heart, but he still pretended to be happy because he did not want Nie Tian to notice anything amiss. Unfortunately, Nie Tian already knew everything. "Nie Tian, let's go back." Guiwu Kuang Sha glanced at Xian Zongfeng and said to Nie Tian. "Okay." Nie Tian nodded slightly and was ready to leave. Immediately, the 3 of them returned to the Castellan mansion. Nie Tian and Guiwu Kuang Sha returned to the small courtyard. After Xian Zongfeng confirmed that the 2 of them had returned, he left the Castellan mansion. A moment later, Xian Zongfeng's figure appeared in a dark valley on Evil Wind Island. "Get out here!" His figure landed, and he roared. His whole body released a terrifying anger. Just as he finished speaking, dozens of black figures appeared, and the leader was the one who gave Nie Tian the blood-weeping sword soul. "Lord Swordmaster, I know my mistake." The black figure landed and knelt in front of Xian Zongfeng. He was so scared that his voice was trembling. The other black figures also knelt down, not daring to make a sound. "Trash! Idiots! A bunch of idiots!" Xian Zongfeng roared with his back facing the crowd. His whole body was trembling, and it was obvious that he was extremely angry. "I know my mistake. Please punish me, Lord Sword Master." The black figure was trembling in fear, and did not dare to raise his head. "Hei Feng, you are the heaven sword soul of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, but you can't even deal with a high god ant." Xian Zongfeng suddenly turned around and stared at Hei Feng with a pair of wolf-like eyes. He said in a deep voice, "If you did not plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Nie Tian, it would have been fine. Why did you tell him about the blood-sobbing sword infant? Why did you tell him about the dancing clothes? What's going on in your head? Is it full of shit?" Lord Sword Master, what are you talking about? Why can't I understand?" Hei Feng was stunned and said in surprise, "I have never said anything about the blood-weeping sword soul, nor did I tell Miss Lian Wui." "You didn't?" Xian Zongfeng was taken aback for a moment before he sneered. "If you don't, then how did Nie Tian know about the blood-weeping sword soul, and how did he know that Lian Wui has it? Tell me everything in detail." Yes. Black Wind was stunned. He had no idea what was going on, so he recounted everything that had happened just now. "What did you say?" Xian Zongfeng's expression changed after hearing Hei Feng's words. A terrifying murderous intent surged in his eyes as he said, "Hei Feng, do you think I'm a 3-year-old? If Nie Tian really swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant, how could his body not have the aura of the blood-weeping sword infant?" This. Black Wind felt Xian Zongfeng's murderous intent, and suddenly became nervous. He said with a trembling voice, "I don't know either. I really saw Nie Tian swallow the crimson sword infant with my own eyes, and they all saw it too." Xian Zongfeng's expression changed, and his expression became extremely cold. He looked at Hei Feng with his eagle-like eyes, then looked at the other men in black, and asked in a deep voice, "Is what Hei Feng said true?" "Absolutely true." Dozens of black-clothed men spoke in unison. They were extremely imposing. Xian Zongfeng's expression changed again, and his eyes began to flicker. What Hei Feng said was very strange, and he didn't dare to believe it. However, he knew Hei Feng very well. The latter was one of his confidants, and had done many things for him. He had never failed, and he was very loyal to him. There was no way he would betray him. With the testimony of the others, Hei Feng's words were very credible. "Hei Feng, you really didn't mention the blood-weeping sword soul to Nie Tian?" After a long silence, Xian Zongfeng's eyes darkened, and he asked coldly. "No, absolutely not." Hei Feng shook his head and said, "Sword Master, you know me. No matter how stupid I am, I would never tell anyone about the blood-weeping sword soul." Xian Zongfeng nodded, but his face was extremely stern. Hei Feng was not a fool. How could he take the initiative to tell Nie Tian about the blood-weeping sword soul? "Nie Tian, it seems like you know quite a lot." Xian Zongfeng's face was gloomy, and his heart was cold. "You just came to Shunwu City a few days ago, how would you know about the blood-weeping sword soul? Who exactly is behind you?" Xian Zongfeng was now sure that Nie Tian already knew about the blood-weeping sword soul, but he didn't think that it was Nie Tian who found it out. Instead, he suspected that there was someone behind Nie Tian. As for who was behind Nie Tian, Xian Zongfeng already had a guess. It was Guiwu Guangsha. "Guiwu Guangsha, it seems like you haven't given up on the death of Wind and Fire Masters." The corner of Xian Zongfeng's eyes twitched, and he said in his heart. The Wind and Fire Masters he was talking about was Guiwu Guangsha's subordinate, and also the father of Qinyu Tower Master, Wind and Fire Qinyu. There was indeed something fishy about the death of the Wind and Fire Masters, and it was Xian Zongfeng himself. "Sword Master, what should we do?" Hei Feng saw that Xian Zongfeng didn't speak, so he raised his head and said, "Should we just kill that kid? Don't act rashly." Xian Zongfeng suddenly waved his hand and said, "Nie Tian alone won't be able to find out about the blood-weeping sword soul. There must be someone powerful behind him. Plus, he has Guiwu Guangsha with him. This person's strength is not to be underestimated. If we want to kill him, I will have to do it myself. But now that Gongsun Xing is about to come out, we can't do it now. If he notices something, it will be troublesome." Gongsun Xing was the name of the other sword master of the Shunwu Sword Pagoda. It seemed like Xian Zongfeng was afraid of Gongsun Xing. "Sword Master, that kid already knows about the blood-weeping sword soul. Are we just going to let him live?" Hei Feng asked with a cold look in his eyes. "Of course we can't let him live." Xian Zongfeng sneered and said, "But we can't kill him directly. We have to use proper means." "Legitimate means?" Black Wind was taken aback. He was puzzled and asked, "What does Sword Master mean?" "Don't ask too much. We just need to stay put and wait for Gongsun Xing to come out." Xian Zongfeng's lips curled into a strange smile and he thought, "Nie Tian, didn't you want the Evil Peak sword competition to be brought forward? Then this Sword Master will use this matter to kill you fair and square." Xian Zongfeng still wasn't sure who was behind Nie Tian, but he knew that he couldn't let Nie Tian live. Not being able to plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Nie Tian was indeed a failure, but Xian Zongfeng didn't care. The one he cared about right now was someone else, Di Shi Tian. Compared to Nie Tian, Xian Zongfeng wanted to plant the blood-weeping sword soul in Di Shi Tian more. In his opinion, Di Shi Tian's talent in sword Dao was much better than Nie Tian's. Chapter 1926. After Xian Zongfeng had personally experienced Di Shi Tian's sword strength, he had made up his mind to plant a blood-weeping sword soul in the latter's body. These few days, Di Shi Tian's every move was under Xian Zongfeng's control. The reason why he did not make a move on Di Tian was because he was facing a problem. Di Tian's sword cultivation was too high. Generally speaking, the blood-weeping sword soul was planted in young sword geniuses and would grow with the growth of the sword cultivator. Although Di Tian was young, his sword cultivation was too high. A normal blood-weeping sword soul seed could not be planted in his body. Therefore, if Xian Zongfeng wanted to plant a blood-weeping sword soul in Di Tian's body, he had to find a stronger blood-weeping sword soul. Xian Zongfeng had already sent people to make arrangements. The stronger blood-weeping sword soul would arrive soon. As long as the stronger blood-weeping sword soul seed arrived, Xian Zongfeng would not hesitate to attack Di Tian. Di Tian was the target he wanted to attack the most. As for Nie Tian, Xian Zongfeng had some doubts in his heart. He did not understand why the blood-weeping sword soul had no effect on Nie Tian. Nie Tian swallowed the blood-weeping sword soul, but there was no aura of the blood-weeping sword soul in his body. This made Xian Zongfeng very puzzled. However, this was not important. As long as the God Sword Master Gongsun Xing came out, Xian Zongfeng would naturally have a way to kill Nie Tian, and he would do it openly. He did not dare to make a move on Nie Tian now because he was worried that there were experts behind the latter. Unfortunately, all of Xian Zongfeng's guesses about Nie Tian were wrong. The blood-weeping sword soul was discovered by Nie Tian and Fat Cat. It had nothing to do with Guiwu Quangsha. Guiwu Quangsha did not even know about the blood-weeping sword soul. There was no expert behind Nie Tian at all. Xian Zongfeng was thinking too much. Lord Sword, they already know about the blood-weeping sword soul. How should we deal with it? At this time, Black Wind's eyes suddenly flickered and transmitted his voice to Xian Zongfeng. Kill! The corner of Xian Zongfeng's mouth twitched as he spat out a word coldly. He then took a step forward and the sword shadows around his body turned into an invisible giant net, covering dozens of black-clothed swordsmen. These people had inadvertently found out about the weeping blood sword infant, so they had to die. Lord Sword Master, I. Immediately, someone sensed that something was wrong, and his expression changed. Just when he was about to speak, he was directly suppressed to death by the terrifying sword intent, and he turned into a ball of blood light before he could finish his sentence. At the same time, the other swordsmen were similarly annihilated. Fresh blood drenched the air, and the scene was horrifying and bloody. In the blink of an eye, the mystic Song Feng had killed dozens of divine martial sword souls. When Black Wind saw the scene before him, he couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. His whole body was drenched in cold sweat. Xian Zongfeng's strength was terrifying, and his methods were ruthless. He was a terrifying person. Black Wind, these people were killed by the 1,000 evil sect. Do you understand? Xian Zongfeng looked at Black Wind cold and said, I understand. Black Wind quickly nodded. It's good that you understand. Let's go. Xian Zongfeng faintly smiled. His figure moved, and he directly left the valley, heading towards the mayor's mansion. At the same time, in the divine martial city mayor's mansion, in a small courtyard, Nie Tian and Guiwu Quangsha stood side by side. Nie Tian, what exactly happened? Guiwu Quangsha asked in a deep voice, with a puzzled expression. He wasn't a fool. Of course, he could see that Xian Zongfeng's reaction was strange, so he wanted to find out. Lord Guiwu, do you really want to know? Nie Tian looked at Guiwu Quangsha, his expression extremely solemn. If he told Guiwu Quangsha about this, it would be equivalent to dragging the latter into this muddy water. Yes. Guiwu Quangsha saw Nie Tian's expression and knew that the latter had something to tell him, so he nodded heavily. All right, since you want to know, I won't hide it from you. Nie Tian nodded, and immediately told everything to Guiwu Quangsha. The latter was dumbstruck, frozen on the spot, and couldn't react for a long time. After a long time, Guiwu Quangsha finally reacted. He looked at Nie Tian and said, Nie Tian, are you sure that Xian Zongfeng is the one who planted the blood-weeping sword infant in Lian Wui's body? I wasn't sure before, but after what happened just now, I'm certain. Nie Tian faintly smiled and said, Lord Guiwu, you also saw the expression on Xian Zongfeng's face when I mentioned the blood-weeping sword infant and Lian Wui. He is definitely the instigator of all this. Guiwu Guangsha solemnly nodded. He had noticed Xian Zongfeng's strange expression, which made him suspicious, and asked Nie Tian about everything. Now that the truth was in front of him, he couldn't doubt it. However, Guiwu Guangsha was still shocked. How could he have thought that the usually sanctimonious Xian Zongfeng would do such a despicable and insidious thing behind his back? The most important thing was that Xian Zongfeng's status was too high. As the owner of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, he was someone who stood at the peak of the sword world. Nie Tian, what do you plan to do next? Guiwu Guangsha calmed down and asked. I don't know what to do. Nie Tian bitterly smiled and said helplessly, Xian Zongfeng's strength is too strong, and his status is too high. Moreover, we don't have any conclusive evidence. Now we can only hope that the other owner of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda isn't involved in the blood-weeping sword infant. Guiwu Guangsha's eyes flickered, but he could only nod in the end. How things would develop next would depend on the other owner. If the other owner was in cahoots with Xian Zongfeng, then there would be no need for Nie Tian and the rest to stay in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Continuing to stay here would only put them in danger. Nie Tian didn't expect that the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, which looked bright and beautiful on the surface, would have such an evil side hidden inside. Nie Tian, you've swallowed the blood-weeping sword infant. Will you be okay? Guiwu Guangsha suddenly looked at Nie Tian and asked with a worried face. Lord Guiwu, don't worry. The blood-weeping sword infant will not be a threat to me. Nie Tian smiled and said confidently. That's good. Guiwu Guangsha nodded and felt relieved. Then, Nie Tian returned to his room. He decided to stay in the small courtyard for a period of time. He wouldn't go out easily. Staying with Guiwu Guangsha would be relatively safer. Inside the room, Nie Tian sat cross-legged and looked inside his body. He wanted to see how much the divine and demon force had changed after swallowing the blood-weeping sword infant. Nie Tian released the divine and demon force and sensed it carefully. He could faintly feel that the divine and demon force had changed a little compared to before. As for what kind of change it was, he couldn't explain it. Nie Tian, from now on, you will try to use the divine and demon force to cultivate your sword intent. I believe that with the help of the divine and demon force, it won't take long for your sword Dao to reach another level. Fat Cat's figure appeared and said proudly. Okay. Nie Tian nodded. He then moved his consciousness and came to the fifth galaxy, the Starry Sky Sword Array. Nie Tian released the divine and demon force in the Starry Sky Sword Array and began to cultivate his sword intent. Chapter 1927. 7 days later, in his room, Nie Tian was diligently cultivating his sword will. Within the Starry Sky Sword formation, Nie Tian's divine consciousness sat cross-legged, feeling the surging sword will in the sword formation. With the Starry Sky Sword formation coupled with the power of the divine demon, Nie Tian could clearly feel his sword will skyrocketing. At this moment, he was constantly condensing sword will, charging towards the oblivion state of the sword. He tried several times consecutively, but the sword will always collapsed at the most critical moment. Beads of sweat appeared on Nie Tian's forehead. His entire body was wrapped in sword will, releasing a very mysterious power. Sword will condense. At some point, he roared in his heart, and the sword will in the Starry Sky Sword formation continued to condense towards the center, forming a sword will light ball, within which an extremely terrifying sword will aura flowed. Nie Tian held his breath, and with a single thought, the sword will light ball soared into the sky, turned into a sword gleam, and rushed towards the sky of the Starry Sky Sword formation. Boom! The sword's shadow rushed like a dragon, an endless sword will condensed. In the end, it condensed and did not dissipate, floating in the starry sky sword formation, like a towering giant, looking down on everything. I did it! Nye Tian suddenly stood up, looking at the terrifying sword shadow, and could clearly feel that the sword will contained within it was much more terrifying than before. Damn, I really did it! Almost at the same time, little Fat Cat's voice rang out, and it couldn't help but curse, "You're too much of a freak. In just 5 days, you've actually raised your sword Dao cultivation to the realm of sword oblivion." Yes. Nye Tian nodded excitedly, unable to hide the ecstasy on his face. He originally thought that even with the support of the power of the divine demon, it would take him half a month to break through the essence of the sword. But now, he only used 5 days to successfully advance to the oblivion state of the sword, which was too terrifying. If someone saw this scene at this moment, their jaw would definitely drop. Nye Tian's martial arts strength, sword principle strength, improved too quickly, it was incredible. Fatty, I didn't expect to reach the sword oblivion realm in such a short time. Nye Tian smiled happily. Fat Cat's figure directly appeared and stood on Nye Tian's shoulder. She chuckled and said, "Looks like after the power of gods and demons devoured the blood-weeping sword infant, the ability to improve the sword will is even better than the blood-weeping sword infant itself. You really can't stop your dog shit luck." Nye Tian laughed and said, "I can feel it too. After the starry sky sword formation is combined with the power of the demon and god, the speed at which the sword will is increasing is several times faster than before. Moreover, after the power of the demon and god is released, it can even directly double the power of the sword will. That's great news." The Fat Cat smiled proudly and said, "The celestial and demon nascent embryo contains the power of 9,000 celestial and demon. You've only awakened 256 celestial and demon powers, and the improvement of your sword will is already so obvious. If all 9,000 celestial and demon powers are awakened, I wonder how strong your sword will be." Nye Tian nodded firmly. His eyes shone with a burning light. He was like an unsheathed sword, extremely sharp. The entire sea of gods and demons was affected by the power of the demon and god. As more and more celestial and demon powers were awakened, Nye Tian's way of the sword would improve faster and faster. Right now, Nye Tian's strength was at the peak of high god. This was a bottleneck for him, as there was a qualitative leap from peak high god to early over god. The entire process from a lesser god to a high god was just the strengthening of the godhead. However, it was completely different for overgods. Only by comprehending the power of laws could one become an overgod. Overgod's laws were the symbol of overgod, as well as the greatest obstacle for cultivators to reach overgod. However, it was not difficult for Nye Tian to comprehend overgod's laws, as he could passively increase his strength to overgod after activating the 3 forbidden techniques. He had already become relatively familiar with overgod's laws during this process. Overgod's laws were a form of comprehension, but they were not very useful in actual battle. As a result, most overgods did not use the power of laws in battle. Nye Tian looked forward to the moment he reached overgod very much. He did not desire overgod's laws, but the awakening of even more power of the stars and the increase in the 9 ultimate war god method. Nye Tian became cold and murmured, "It's all thanks to the blood-weeping sword nascent that I was able to increase my way of the sword so quickly this time." He knew that the blood-weeping sword nascent's devouring of the power of the demon and god was an impact on his way of the sword. It created an opportunity for him to increase his cultivation. "Nye Tian, your current battle prowess has increased by at least several times compared to before," the Fat Cat said excitedly. "Yeah," Nye Tian nodded firmly before leaving the room. Gui Wu Kuangsha was standing in the small courtyard. When he saw Nye Tian come out, his gaze involuntarily trembled. His expression changed as he said in astonishment, "Nie Tian, your way of the sword has increased?" Nie Tian nodded his head and said, "Many thanks to Lord Gui Wu for waiting by the side." Gui Wu Kuang Sha had been guarding the courtyard for the past few days, secretly protecting Nie Tian. "I've really increased by a realm." Gui Wu Kuang Sha's gaze trembled. The shock in his heart was written all over his face. Previously, he had sensed sword intent ripples in Nie Tian's room. He had guessed that Nie Tian was trying to break through to the way of the sword, so he had been guarding the courtyard. However, he had never imagined that in just a few days, Nie Tian would actually increase his way of the sword. Nie Tian's speed of improvement had once again refreshed his position in Gui Wu Kuang Sha's heart. For an ordinary swordsman, it would take hundreds or even thousands of years to increase their way of the sword. Even sword geniuses like Jian Jingyun and Gui Wu can had to accumulate for a very long time before they could achieve an increase in their way of the sword. Compared to other swordsmen, Nie Tian was simply a monster. Nie Tian faintly smiled. Gui Wu Kuang Sha's reaction was so huge that it had caught him unprepared. "Lord Gui Wu, has the divine sword master ended his seclusion?" Nie Tian looked at Gui Wu Kuang Sha and changed the topic. Gui Wu Kuang Sha was slightly stunned. He calmed down and shook his head helplessly, saying, "Not yet. Why is it taking so long?" Nie Tian frowned. Previously, Xian Zongfeng had said that the master of the divine sword would come out of seclusion in a few days. Now that 10 days had passed, the master of the divine sword had yet to make a move. This made him worried. Bang! However, at this time, in a certain place in the backyard of the city lord's mansion, a frightening sword force soared into the sky. It transformed into a huge sword light and soared into the sky. What a frightening sword force! The sudden scene caused Nie Tian's eyes to tremble, and he cried out in alarm. This is... Gui Wu Kuang Sha was also stunned. His mouth was wide open, and he was unable to say anything else. What happened? 2 figures scuttled out at this time and shouted in panic. They were Jian Jingyun and Gui Wu Kan. At the same time, in the divine martial city's sword field, Di Shi Tian and Lian Wui were originally practicing their swords in the sword formation. When they suddenly saw the huge sword light in the sky, both of them were stunned and shocked. "Little brother Di Shi Tian, what's going on?" Lian Wui frowned and asked nervously. Chapter 1928. Someone has advanced to the legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial arts? Lian Wui was surprised to hear Di Shi Tian's words, and her face stiffened. Di Shi Tian's reaction was very calm, and he only nodded slightly. As the legendary swordsman of the unification of sword and martial arts, he was very familiar with this realm. The sword intent in the sky could not be wrong. At the same time, all the swordsmen in the Shenwu city raised their heads and looked at the dazzling sword radiance in the sky. Their expressions were dull, and their faces were filled with reverence. Of course, they could feel the terrifying sword intent in the sword radiance, and it deeply shocked them. In the governor's mansion, Xian Zongfeng's figure moved, and he flew up and stood on the roof. He looked at the sword radiance with an extremely gloomy expression, and said, "Gongsun Xingji, I really did not expect you to advance to the legendary realm." Xian Zongfeng was very sure that the sword radiance in the sky was released by the divine sword master, Gongsun Xingji. He was very surprised that Gongsun Xingji had advanced to the legendary realm of the unification of sword and martial art. "Gongsun Xingji, should I go congratulate you now?" Xian Zongfeng's lips curled into a cold smile, and then his figure turned into a sword shadow, and he flew towards the backyard of the governor's mansion. At the same time, Nie Tian and the others also rushed towards the backyard. Nie Tian could guess that the sword radiance was definitely caused by the divine sword master coming out of seclusion. After a while, Nie Tian and the others appeared at the same time, and they came to a secluded courtyard. "Sword Master Wu." Nie Tian saw Xian Zongfeng, and he smiled faintly as he greeted him. Xian Zongfeng nodded slightly, and there was an ugly smile on his face. Bang! At this moment, a muffled sound came from the courtyard, and then a figure calmly walked out. His entire body was surging with sword intent, and a halo surrounded him. The sword radiance was dazzling, and it looked extremely holy, and it made people feel reverence. However, when this figure walked out and appeared in front of everyone, Nie Tian and the others couldn't help but be stunned and their faces stiffened. The figure that walked out of the courtyard was a short and stout old man with a grizzled goatee. His hands were behind his back, and his eyes were narrowed into slits. There was a faint smile on the corner of his mouth, and he appeared to be at ease. This! Nie Tian's eyes flickered, and he screamed in his heart, "Isn't this the old version of Jean de Bao?" If one were to look at the old man's physique, it would definitely be the same as Jean de Bao's. The width of the old man's body was the same as that of Jean de Bao's, making him look like a large ball. The short and stout old man walked out slowly and glanced at the crowd without saying a word. Xian Zongfeng stepped forward and said sincerely, "Brother Gongsun, congratulations on coming out of seclusion. Your sword Dao has advanced to the legendary realm. Lord Divine Sword Master, congratulations." Guiwu Kuangsha also slightly nodded his head and said. Nie Tian turned around and looked at Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Kan. The latter two also had ugly expressions. The three of them didn't expect that the Divine Sword Master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda would look like this. Although the Divine Sword Master and the Sword Master Wu were the two Sword Masters of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and were usually mentioned together, there was an obvious difference in their statuses. The Divine Sword Master's status was obviously higher than the Sword Master Wu's. It was like the Heaven and Earth Masters of the Inescapable Net, and the Heaven Master's status was higher than the Earth Master's. The Divine Sword Master in front of Nie Tian and the others was known as the number 1 swordsman of the 9 zones. However, this number 1 swordsman's physique was a bit awkward. No matter how surprised Nie Tian and the others were, they had to accept that the fat old man in front of them was the Divine Sword Master of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Gongsun Xingji. "Brother Zongfeng, you've worked hard during the time I was in seclusion." Gongsun Xingji finally spoke with a loud voice like a bell. He looked at Xian Zongfeng and laughed. "Did anything happen in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda?" Xian Zongfeng smiled and bowed. "It's nothing. A few days ago, the 3 devils of the North Sea came to cause a ruckus, but I sent them away." "That's good." Gongsun Xingji didn't ask further. He looked at Guiwu Sha and smiled. "Brother Guiwu, I haven't seen you in a while. What brings you to Shenwu City?" "It's a long story." Guiwu Sha laughed and said, "Sir Divine Sword Master, to be honest, I have a favor to ask this time. Brother Guiwu, you are from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. We're all on the same side, so there's no need to be so formal." Gongsun Xingji nodded and smiled. "Let's talk about it in the meeting room." "Okay, Brother Gongsun, please." Xian Zongfeng quickly nodded and moved aside, letting Gongsun Xingji walk in front. Gongsun Xingji didn't stand on ceremony. His fat body walked in front like a walking millstone. From the beginning to the end, Gongsun Xingji didn't even look at Nie Tian and the others. "This fat old man is quite arrogant." Nie Tian laughed in his heart and followed. A moment later, everyone arrived at the meeting room. Gongsun Xingji and Xian Zongfeng sat on the left and right side of the hall respectively. Guiwu Sha sat on the right, while Nie Tian and the others stood without taking a seat. Nie Tian looked at Gongsun Xingji and Xian Zongfeng and thought, "These 2 sword masters, one fat and one skinny, they complement each other well." Xian Zongfeng was originally a skinny man, and when he sat next to Gongsun Xingji, it was even more obvious that he was sitting like a stick. At this time, Gongsun Xingji's eyes slowly fell on Nie Tian and the others, and said in a lazy tone, "Who are these kids?" Xian Zongfeng didn't speak, but looked at Guiwu Sha. The latter was about to speak, but saw Nie Tian take a step forward. He couldn't help but frown, and swallowed the words that were about to come out of his mouth. Lord Divine Sword Master, I am Junior Nyetian, a friend of Master Guiwu. Nyetian took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, I am Jian Jingyun. I am Guiwu Ken. Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Ken both reacted and said, Gongsun Xingji's eyes locked on Nyetian, as if he had discovered something. His eyes couldn't help but tremble, and his face was full of surprise, but he quickly calmed down and laughed. Little kid, your talent is simply terrifying. Lord Divine Sword Master is overpraising me. Nyetian smiled and replied calmly. Then, Gongsun Xingji's eyes swept over Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Kan, and he said, The two kids from the Jian family and Guiwu family are also quite talented, but compared to this kid named Nyetian, they are far behind. Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Kan nodded slightly, and they didn't feel uncomfortable. After all, they already knew that their talent was far behind Nyetian's. Little kids, please take a seat. Gongsun Xingji smiled faintly, and he gestured for Nyetian and the others to sit down. Jian Jingyun and Guiwu Kan sat down, but Nyetian didn't. Instead, he took another step forward, looked at Gongsun Xingji, and said, Lord Divine Sword Master, I came to the Shenwu city this time to ask for a favor from the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Since Lord Divine Sword Master has already come out of seclusion, I don't want to waste any more time, so I will be straightforward. Gongsun Xingji looked at Nyetian, and his eyes couldn't help but freeze. This was the first time he saw someone so impatient to ask for a favor. Chapter 1929. In the Great Hall, Gongsun Xing looked at Nyetian with a hint of anticipation in his eyes. He guessed that Guiwu Quangsha brought Nyetian to the Shenwu city to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. In fact, most swordsmen who came to the Shenwu city were here to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Gongsun Xing had never seen someone as talented as Nyetian at such a young age. Therefore, as long as Nyetian asked to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda, Gongsun Xing would agree without any hesitation. Gongsun Xing even had another idea, to take Nyetian as his disciple. He felt that Nyetian's talent in swordsmanship was even greater than Lian Wui's. He would have no regrets if he could take in such an outstanding disciple. Unfortunately, Gongsun Xing was completely wrong. Nyetian did not come to the Shenwu city to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Xian Zongfeng looked at Nyetian with a strange smile on his face. His eyes flickered as if he was waiting for a good show. He had worked with Gongsun Xing for many years and knew the latter very well. Although Gongsun Xing looked gentle and amiable, he was a very arrogant and stubborn person. He would never allow anyone to break the rules of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Nyetian wanted to bring forward the Evil Edge Sword competition, which was challenging Gongsun Xing's bottom line. Guiwu Quangsha's heart was in his throat. He was also worried about how Gongsun Xing would react after Nyetian revealed his real purpose. Nyetian nodded slightly and said calmly, Divine Sword Master, I came to the Divine Martial Sword Pagoda in the hope that you can bring forward the Evil Edge Sword competition. Before Nyetian could finish, Gongsun Xing's face suddenly darkened. His eyes were extremely gloomy and an imperceptible sword essence surged around him. Xian Zongfeng sensed Gongsun Xing's reaction and couldn't help but twitch his lip. He sneered and said, Nyetian, let's see how you deal with this. Old man Gongsun's tiger but is not something that anyone can touch. The expression on Guiwu Quangsha's face changed, as his nerves instantly tensed up. He was even worried that Gongsun Xing would suddenly attack and kill Nyetian. Gongsun Xing's face darkened as he stared at Nyetian with cold eyes. After a while, he said in a cold voice, Kid, your talent is not bad. I will pretend that I didn't hear what you just said. The Evil Edge Sword duel was held once every 30,000 years. This was a rule that had been set since the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was founded. It had never changed in the past 1,000,000 years. Nie Tian had requested Gongsun Xingji to hold the evil-edged sword competition in front of him, which was a blatant provocation in the latter's eyes. If not for the fact that Nie Tian was brought here by the ghost Marshal Wild Sand, and that his talent in the way of the sword was monstrously terrifying, Gongsun Xing would have definitely killed him. Anyone who had heard of Gongsun Xingji knew that this old man was outrageously stubborn. Nie Tian was stunned. He could sense the suppressed anger in Gongsun Xingji's eyes, and even suppressed killing intent. He did not expect Gongsun Xingji to be so troublesome. Before he could say anything, the latter was already on fire. Divine Sword Master, I came to Evil Edge Island for the Evil Edge Sword Duel. I must get it done. Nie Tian calmed down a little, took a step forward, and said faintly. He had said the same thing to Xian Zongfeng. The latter's reaction at that time was to kill Nie Tian. He did not know how Gongsun Xingji would react now. How dare you! Suddenly, Gongsun Xingji growled and stood up. His entire body surged with sword aura, and the entire conference hall suddenly became shaky. If it was not for the protection of the sword formation, it would have collapsed into ruins. Boom! A violent pressure was suddenly released, pressing towards Nie Tian. In an instant, Nie Tian felt an endless and terrifying pressure coming from the space around him. He could not avoid it at all, and could only bear it. Pfft! Nie Tian's body trembled, and he coughed up a mouthful of blood. His face twisted under the enormous pressure, but the determination in his eyes did not change. Nie Tian. Upon seeing this, Jian Jingyun and Gui Wushan sprang to their feet at the same time and exclaimed in shock. Gongsun Xingji was the #1 swordsman in the 9 zones. The pressure he released was enough to kill ordinary paramount gods. At this moment, Nie Tian didn't even have the chance to use his 3 forbidden technique. How could he withstand such a terrifying sword aura? Gui Wushan's eyes trembled, and his face was also filled with shock. He did not dare to make a move, because he knew that if he did, Gongsun Xingji would kill Nie Tian without hesitation. What a powerful martial body! Xian Zongfeng looked at Nie Tian and his eyes narrowed. He could sense that the pressure Gongsun Xingji was releasing was enough to kill an early-stage paramount god, but Nie Tian was able to withstand it, which showed how powerful his martial body was. Kid, take back what you just said, and I will spare your life. Gongsun Xingji's face fell. He was shocked by how powerful Nie Tian's martial body was. Then he said in a low voice, giving Nie Tian a second chance to live. Nie Tian looked like he was in pain, but the sharpness in his eyes did not diminish. He could not speak, and could only shake his head with difficulty. He had to bring forward the evil-edged sword duel. This was his goal, and it would not change. Gongsun Xingji's face fell, and his eyes shone with killing intent. He growled, Kid, you're forcing I to make a move. Don't blame I for what happens next. As his voice fell, Gongsun Xingji released an even more powerful sword aura. It was like a rolling wave that kept battering at Nie Tian. At that moment, black runes seeped out of Nie Tian's body. At the same time, a strange power surged within his body. He forcibly released his fiend god energy, trying to activate the 3 forbidden skills to resist Gongsun Xingji's aura. Given Gongsun Xingji's status, if his sword aura couldn't kill Nie Tian, he would be too embarrassed to do so. Gongsun Xingji suddenly sensed that Nie Tian's aura was growing stronger. His face fell, and he was horrified. He could not imagine that a high god martial artist could actually resist under his pressure. Boom! However, in the next moment, Nie Tian's entire body suddenly released violent black runes, and the sword aura around him suddenly erupted, and a terrifying sword aura instantly bloomed. At this moment, everyone's eyes trembled, and their faces were filled with extreme shock. Gongsun Xingji's eyes turned slightly cold, as though he had discovered something. He stretched out his hand and released an enormous sword essence, directly suppressing Nie Tian's sword aura. Nie Tian's body trembled, and he spat out another mouthful of blood. His face turned as white as a sheet. But he still raised his head and stared at Gongsun Xingji with a pair of resolute eyes. He did not expect that Gongsun Xingji, an expert at the peak of the sword world, would not only use his sword aura to suppress a junior, but also attack him directly. Chapter 1930. In the great hall of the city lord's mansion, Gongsun Xing's eyes suddenly shone with killing intent. He directly attacked Nie Tian, intending to kill the latter. Seeing this, Guiwu Quangsha's expression changed, and he cried inwardly, "Not good, Gongsun Sheng already knows Nie Tian's identity. This is bad." Guiwu Quangsha already knew that Nie Tian was a fiend god nascent embryo, and was the grandson of the Wind and Cloud Alliance's master Nie Dao. This was a secret that absolutely could not be let to others, especially Gongsun Sheng, because Gongsun Sheng and Nie Dao were mortal enemies. Originally, with Gongsun Sheng's identity, it was impossible for him to directly attack Nie Tian. He must have sensed Nie Tian's identity, which was why he suddenly attacked. Everyone in the Nine Realms knew about the grudge between Nie Dao and Gongsun Sheng. A long time ago, Nie Dao and Gongsun Sheng had been good friends, but an engagement had caused the two to completely fall out. Speaking of this engagement, it had caused an uproar in the Nine Realms, to the point that almost everyone knew about it. The two parties of the engagement were Nie Dao's eldest son, Nie Fenghua, and Gongsun Sheng's daughter, Third Lady Gongsun. Nie Fenghua and Third Lady Gongsun had known each other since they were young, and could be said to be childhood sweethearts. The two were originally about to get married, but on the day of the wedding, something unexpected happened. Nie Fenghua ran away from the wedding. On the day of the wedding, all the influential people in the Nine Realms were present. Nie Fenghua's escape greatly enraged Gongsun Sheng. He believed that Nie Fenghua's escape was a great humiliation to the Gongsun family, and made them the laughingstock of the Nine Realms. Later, despite Nie Dao's numerous apologies, Gongsun Sheng ignored them and swore that the Gongsun family would no longer have any dealings with the Nie family. From then on, Gongsun Shengji and Nie Dao went from being good friends to being sworn enemies who never interacted with each other. Guiwu Quangsha had been worried that Nie Tian's identity would be exposed, which would incite Gongsun Sheng's rage. But he had forgotten, so he didn't have time to tell Nie Tian. At this moment, Gongsun Sheng had sensed the aura of the god-restricting fetus on Nie Tian. Coupled with his surname, he immediately knew that Nie Tian was from the Nie family. People from the Feng Yun Nie clan had appeared in the divine martial city and requested for the Evil Peak sword competition to be held in front of Gongsun Shengji. In Gongsun Shengji's opinion, this was the most blatant provocation. Gongsun Sheng would have killed Nie Tian long ago if he didn't want to confirm Nie Tian's identity. Under Gongsun Shengji's pressure, Nie Tian was bleeding profusely from the corner of his mouth. His entire body was twisted, and his bones crackled as if they were about to shatter at any moment. Gongsun Shengji was too strong. Nie Tian was no match for him. Nie Tian kept his mind clear. He was very curious as to why Gongsun Sheng would suddenly become enraged. "My relationship with the Alliance Master is none of your business." Nie Tian raised his head with difficulty and stared at Gongsun Shengji with his bloodshot eyes. Gongsun Shengji's eyes darkened. He took a step forward, and his aura surged as he roared, "Brat, you're courting death." At this moment, Gongsun Shengji didn't care about anything else. He didn't care about the relationship between Nie Tian and Nie Dao. As long as he was sure that Nie Tian was from the Nie family, it was enough reason to kill him. "Gongsun Shengji, don't kill him." Guiwu Quangsha suddenly sensed Gongsun Shengji's murderous intent and screamed, but he didn't dare to move. He knew that even if he made a move, he wouldn't be able to stop Gongsun Shengji. On the other side, Xian Zongfeng's eyes were shining brightly. He noticed that Gongsun Shengji's actions were a little unusual, but he didn't know why. However, if Nie Tian died in Gongsun Xingji's hands, it would be great news for him. In this way, the people behind Guiwu Kuangsha and Nie Tian would only look for Gongsun Xingji, and wouldn't care about Xian Zongfeng anymore. Don't kill him. Almost at the moment when Gongsun Xing made his move, an anxious voice suddenly rang out. Then, a figure flew over like a sharp blade of wind and frost, flying straight at him. San Yang. When Gongsun Xingji heard the voice, his face suddenly changed. He stopped what he was doing and screamed. He raised his head to look at the figure outside the hall. Everyone was stunned at this moment. Then, their gazes turned to the outside of the hall, and a graceful figure in green appeared in their line of sight. It was a woman with beautiful facial features. She looked very young, only in her 20s, but her beautiful eyes couldn't hide the vicissitudes of life. Third Lady Gongsun. Guiwu Kuangsha couldn't help but shout when he saw the face in front of him. The woman who suddenly appeared was none other than Gongsun Xingji's only daughter, Third Lady Gongsun. Xian Zongfeng looked at Third Lady Gongsun and couldn't help but frown. He thought to himself, Third Lady Gongsun, why did she suddenly appear? Third Lady Gongsun's appearance was out of everyone's expectation, and it made the atmosphere even more strange. Third Lady, why are you here? Gongsun Xingji looked at his daughter and restrained his aura. His face was full of surprise and surprise. It turned out that ever since Nie Fenghua ran away from the marriage, Third Lady Gongsun had ignored everyone. Even Gongsun Xingji rarely saw her. Because of this, Gongsun Xingji hated Nie Fenghua and the Nie clan even more. Third Lady Gongsun's sudden appearance was something that Gongsun Xingji could never have imagined. Father, you've broken through to the legendary realm of sword and martial arts as one. I wanted to see you. Third Lady Gongsun said lightly. Her eyes were cold. Her gaze swept across Nie Tian, and her expression became a little strange. Third Lady, I'm so happy that you're willing to come out. Gongsun Xingji was so happy that he even forgot about Nie Tian. At this moment, Third Lady Gongsun's expression did not look good. She frowned and looked at Gongsun Xingji. Father, he's just a child. With your status, why did you kill him? Gongsun Xingji's expression became slightly ugly. He coughed and said, Third Lady, don't ask about this. I have my reasons for killing him. Father. Third Lady Gongsun could sense that Gongsun Xingji was deliberately hiding it from her. Gongsun Xingji's expression changed and became ugly. He hesitated for a moment, then finally said, He's from the Nie clan. From the Nie clan? Third Lady Gongsun was stunned for a moment. She then looked at Nie Tian again, and suddenly noticed that his eyes were so familiar. She couldn't help but be stunned. Why are his eyes so similar to that person's? Third Lady Gongsun's eyes flickered as she exclaimed in her heart. The Nie Tian in front of her reminded her of someone, Nie Fenghua. Third Lady Gongsun immediately remembered that Nie Tian was from the Nie clan. She exclaimed in her heart again, Could he be? The sudden thought caused Third Lady Gongsun's expression to stiffen. She stood rooted to the ground. Third Lady, are you all right? Gongsun Xingji saw that Third Lady Gongsun was stunned and couldn't help but be furious. He stared at Nie Tian and roared, This kid must have reminded you of the past. I kill him. Chapter 1931. Third Madam, what are you doing? Seeing Third Madam Gongsun suddenly stand in front of Nie Tian, Gongsun Xingji was stunned. He's a member of the Nie family, why are you protecting him? Father, what happened back then is already in the past. It doesn't matter if he's a member of the Nie family, Third Madam Gongsun said calmly. Gongsun Xingji was confused. He didn't understand why Third Madam Gongsun would suddenly act like this. Guiwu Kuangsha and Xian Zongfeng were also shocked. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Little brother, are you okay? Third Madam Gongsun turned to Nie Tian. Her expression was calm and even showed a trace of care. I'm fine. Thank you for saving me, Miss Gongsun. Nie Tian nodded slightly. His body had recovered, and his pale face had regained some color. If third Madame Gongsun hadn't appeared in time, Nie Tian would have been in real danger. Nie Tian now knew the relationship between third Madame Gongsun and Gongsun Xingji. He couldn't believe that Gongsun Xingji had such a beautiful daughter. He also found it strange that third Madame Gongsun would save him. Moreover, he felt that third Madame Gongsun looked at him strangely, giving him an indescribable feeling. It was as if Nie Tian was a very important person to third Madame Gongsun. "What's your name?" Third Madame Gongsun looked at Nie Tian and asked through voice transmission. "Nie Tian." Nie Tian froze for a moment before replying. Third Madame Gongsun's eyes trembled. Then she asked again, "Nie Feng Hua is your father, right?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed. He hesitated for a moment but still nodded. You really are his son." Third Madame Gongsun was stunned. She screamed in her heart and trembled. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Gongsun Xingji stepped forward and supported third Madame Gongsun. He asked nervously, "Third Madame, are you okay?" Third Lady Gongsun stared blankly for a long time before finally coming to her senses. She shook her head, indicating that she was fine. Third Lady Gongsun glanced at Nie Tian, then said to Gongsun Xingji, "Father, can you please not kill him?" Gongsun Xing was stunned for a moment, but in the end, he nodded. "Nie Tian, you can leave now. Don't ever come to godly Martial City again." Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian with a strange expression and said faintly, "Nie Tian, let's go." Seeing this, Ghost Martial Wild Sand immediately went to Nie Tian's side, preparing to leave. Third Madame Gongsun begged for mercy, and Gongsun Xing was willing to let Nie Tian go. This was the best result. Gongsun Xingji looked at Nie Tian with a complicated expression. He was amazed by Nie Tian's freakish recovery ability. Just now, he had almost killed Nie Tian. The latter's flesh and bones were under great pressure, but he was able to recover in the blink of an eye. It was really terrifying. No. Unexpectedly, Nie Tian didn't plan to leave. Instead, he looked at Gongsun Xingji with burning eyes and said word by word, "Divine Sword Lord, you haven't agreed to the matter of the evil-edged sword discourse. I can't leave." When Nie Tian's voice fell, the atmosphere suddenly changed, becoming oppressive and deathly silent. Xian Zongfeng and Ghost Martial Wild Sand looked at Nie Tian in shock. They didn't expect the latter to dare to say such a thing under such circumstances. This was simply challenging the limits of Gongsun Xingji's patience. They had to admit that Nie Tian was indeed courageous. He wasn't afraid of death and wouldn't give up until he reached his goal. Gongsun Xingji's relieved expression sank again. He even suspected that he had misheard. He looked at Nie Tian in disbelief and coldly asked, "What did you say?" Nie Tian didn't avoid Gongsun Xingji's gaze and faintly said, "You haven't agreed to the matter of the evil-edged sword discourse. I can't leave. You're courting death." Gongsun Xingji's pupils shrank as his killing intent was released. He was like an enraged wild beast, about to kill Nie Tian. "Father!" Once again, Third Lady Gongsun's voice sounded. She reached out and stopped Gongsun Xingji. Gongsun Xingji's eyes widened. He didn't understand why Third Lady Gongsun wanted to save Nie Tian. After stopping Gongsun Xingji, Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian and asked, "Nie Tian, what do you mean by the evil-edged sword discourse?" Nie Tian thought for a while and said, "I want the evil-edged sword discourse to be brought forward." Third Lady Gongsun's beautiful eyes trembled. She didn't expect Nie Tian to ask for such a thing. No wonder Gongsun Xingji was so angry. "Stinking brat, you are a member of the Nie family. I let you go, which is already a huge concession. Don't be so ungrateful." Gongsun Xingji was furious and roared, "You want the evil-edged sword discourse to be brought forward with just one sentence? Impossible." "Father." Before Gongsun Xingji finished speaking, Third Lady Gongsun's voice suddenly sounded. Then, she actually turned around and knelt in front of Gongsun Xingji. Third Lady, what are you doing? Gongsun Xingji was stunned by Third Lady Gongsuan's sudden action. He immediately went forward and tried to pull her up. Father, I have a request. If you don't agree, I won't get up. Third Lady Gongsun raised her head and looked at Gongsun Xingji. She was actually unwilling to get up. Third Lady, what is it? Father will agree. Hurry up and get up. Gongsun Xingji was astonished. He didn't know what Third Lady Gongsun wanted to do. Third Lady Gongsuan's beautiful eyes flickered. She said in a deep voice, Father, I want you to agree to Nie Tian's request. Her voice wasn't loud, but it made the entire hall fall into a deathly silence. No one expected that Third Lady Gongsun would kneel for Nie Tian. Nie Tian's expression also changed. He was extremely shocked. Third Lady, do you know what you are doing? Gongsun Xingji was stunned for a few seconds. When he came back to his senses, he roared furiously. Father, I know I'm making things difficult for you, but I only have one request. Please agree. Third Lady Gongsun raised her head and looked at Gongsun Xingji. Her eyes were filled with determination. Third Lady. Gongsun Xingji's expression was complicated. His face seemed to have aged a lot. He said in grief, Why are you doing this? Haven't the Nie family harmed us enough? Nie Fenghua ran away from the marriage and made you the laughingstock of the 9 realms. Our Gongsun family can't raise our heads. Have you forgotten? If I bring forward the evil-edged sword meet, how will the people of the 9 realms look at us? Where will the dignity of the divine martial sword tower go? Have you thought about all of this? Gongsun Sheng was like an enraged wild beast as he said those words one after another. Gongsun Sheng was filled with grief and hatred. Father, I know what you are saying. Third Lady Gongsuan's eyes were filled with determination. She said, But let your daughter be willful for once. Promise me. Why? Gongsun Xingji looked at Third Lady Gongsun with a pained expression and roared crazily. Third Lady Gongsun didn't say anything. She only said in her heart, Because I own Nie Fenghua, I have to pay him back. Third Lady Gongsun didn't say anything. Gongsun Xingji didn't nod. The situation fell into a stalemate. The atmosphere was suffocating. The hall was so silent that even a pin drop could be heard. After a long time, Gongsun Xingji suddenly asked, Xian Zongfeng, what do you think about this? He looked at Xian Zongfeng. Chapter 1932. Gongsun Xingji asked for Xian Zongfeng's opinion. His intention was obvious. He hoped that Xian Zongfeng would oppose this. After all, the evil-edged sword competition was related to the entire Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Even if Gongsun Xingji agreed to bring forward the competition, things would be difficult if Xian Zongfeng strongly opposed it. Xian Zongfeng coughed and glanced at Nie Tian. Finally, his eyes landed on Gongsun Xingji and said, Brother Gongsun, I think we can agree to bring forward the competition. Before Xian Zongfeng finished, Gongsun Xingji was surprised. He thought he had heard wrong. In the past, Xian Zongfeng had always listened to his opinion. Why did he suddenly change his mind this time? Cough. Xian Zongfeng coughed again and said, Brother Gongsun, you may not know this, but there is a legendary realm swordsman with Nie Tian. Gongsun Xing was taken aback. He said subconsciously, That's impossible. There is no legendary realm swordsman in the 9 realms. Gongsun Xingji was very familiar with all the famous swordsmen in the 9 realms. He had never heard of anyone reaching the legendary realm. Brother Gongsun, this is absolutely true. Not only have I seen that swordsman, but I also competed with him in sword intent and lost. Xian Zongfeng said while observing Gongsun Xingji's reaction. Gongsun Xingji's expression changed again. He frowned and said, Could it be that someone from the 9 realms has reached the legendary realm before me? After his seclusion, his swordsmanship cultivation had advanced to the legendary realm. He originally thought that he was the only legendary swordsman in the 9 realms, but now another legendary swordsman had suddenly appeared, which was somewhat unacceptable to him. Yes. Xian Zongfeng nodded and said, "What's even more strange is that the legendary realm swordsman is a child of 6 or 7 years old." A child? Gongsun Xingji's expression changed again. He waved his hand and said, "That's impossible. In the 9 realms, if someone reached the legendary realm, he must be a famous swordsman. It can't be a child." What Xian Zongfeng said was too strange for Gongsun Xing to accept. Xian Zongfeng laughed, then looked at Guiwu Guangsha and said, "Brother Guiwu can testify for this matter." "Guiwu Guangsha, is this true?" Gongsun Xing turned around and asked Guiwu Guangsha. "It's true." Guiwu Guangsha nodded. He did not quite understand why Xian Zongfeng would mention Di Shitian at this time and what was his intention. Gongsun Xing's expression was twisted. It took him a long time to recover. He looked at Xian Zongfeng and said, "Xian Zongfeng, even if the legendary swordsman you mentioned exists, so what? Does it have anything to do with whether we should bring forward the evil-edged sword duel?" "It does." Xian Zongfeng smiled strangely and said, "Brother Gongsun, as far as I know, apart from you, this legendary swordsman is the only one in the 9 realms. Since this lord has come to Shenwu City, why don't we invite him to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda?" Gongsun Xing frowned and immediately understood that Xian Zongfeng wanted this legendary swordsman to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. However, Nie Tian and Guiwu Guangsha were stunned and immediately thought of something. They already knew that Xian Zongfeng was not a good person. Xian Zongfeng must have an ulterior motive for inviting Di Shitian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. It was not hard to guess. Xian Zongfeng wanted Di Shitian to stay in the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. This way, he could better control Di Shitian and wait for the opportunity to plant the blood-weeping sword infant in his body. Gongsun Xing glanced at Xian Zongfeng and said, "Xian Zongfeng, if you have something to say, just say it." "Okay." Xian Zongfeng smiled faintly and looked at Nie Tian and said, "Nie Tian, if you want the evil-edged sword duel to be brought forward, you must agree to 2 conditions. First, you must let Lord Di Shitian join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Second, you must participate in the Shura Sword Field this time." Shura Sword Field. Hearing Xian Zongfeng mention this name, Guiwu Guangsha and Third Lady Gongsun could not help but stare blankly, exclaiming at the same time, "What's the Shura Sword Field?" Nie Tian asked. The Shura Sword Field is used to select new members of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. It's a sword competition. Xian Zongfeng's lips twitched. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "I can participate in the Shura Sword Field, but whether Di Shitian joins the Shenwu Sword Pagoda or not is his own business. I have no right to decide." Xian Zongfeng smiled and insisted, "That won't do. Lord Di Shitian must join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda." Xian Zongfeng had already thought of these 2 conditions. Letting Di Shitian join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was to make him stay. The reason why he wanted Nie Tian to participate in the Azura Sword Field was to kill him. The Shura Sword Field was a very cruel place. It was definitely not as simple as Xian Zongfeng said. Nie Tian frowned and couldn't help but feel troubled. He wasn't worried about the Shura Sword Field at all, but it would be difficult for Di Shitian to join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. Di Shitian was one of the founders of the Shenwu Sword Pagoda and the first sword master of the pagoda. Letting him join the Shenwu Sword Pagoda was a bit difficult. Although Fat Cat could order Di Shitian to do so, Nie Tian didn't want to make things difficult for Di Shitian. No need. While Nie Tian was in a dilemma, Gongsun Xing suddenly said, "Nie Tian, as long as you can pass the Shura Sword Field, I will agree to your request. As for the legendary swordsman, I will talk to him personally." "Brother Gongsun, this..." Xian Zongfeng was stunned and looked embarrassed. He didn't expect Gongsun Xing to make such a decision. "I has already decided. there's no need to say more. Gongsun Sheng waved his hand and interrupted Xian Zongfeng. He then looked at Third Lady Gongsun and said, "Third Lady, you should get up now. Father, the Shura sword field is." Third Lady Gongsun was stunned. She looked very nervous, but before she could finish, she was interrupted by Nie Tian. Nie Tian stepped forward and helped Third Lady Gongsun up. He smiled and said confidently, "Lady Gongsun, you've helped me enough. If I can't even pass the Shura sword field, what right do I have to ask the Shenwu Sword Pagoda to bring forward the Evil Edge Sword competition?" Third Lady Gongsun looked at Nie Tian and felt the confidence in his eyes. She wanted to say more, but she swallowed her words in the end. Gongsun Shing looked at Nie Tian and said with disdain, "Kid, you're talking too much. Not everyone can pass the Shura sword field." The reason why Gongsun Shing dared to agree to Nie Tian's condition was because he was sure that Nie Tian couldn't pass the Shura sword field. A mere superior deity martial artist wanted to pass the Azura sword field? What a joke! Guiwu Quangsha's expression was very ugly and he was very worried. Although he knew that Nie Tian was strong and strange, the Shura sword field wasn't that easy to pass. Chapter 1933. The reason why Xian Zongfeng suggested for Nie Tian to participate in the Shura sword field was because he had already arranged everything. As long as Nie Tian entered the Shura sword field, it would be impossible for him to walk out alive. "Nie Tian, I will give you 3 days to prepare. 3 days later, I will personally bring you to the Shura sword field," Gongsun Shing said cold as he looked at Nie Tian with a gloomy face. Nie Tian smiled faintly and said, "Lord Divine Sword, there's no need to go through so much trouble. Let's go to the Shura sword field now." "Now?" Gongsun Shing was stunned for a moment, then he smiled coldly and asked, "Have you thought it through?" "Nie Tian, don't show off for a moment." Guiwu Quangsha also spoke, reminding Nie Tian not to be impulsive. The Shura sword field was not a joke. Nie Tian did not know much about the Shura sword field, but Guiwu Quangsha knew how dangerous it was. If Nie Tian could have 3 days to understand the Shura sword field, then his chances of passing would be relatively higher. Nie Tian suggested going to the Shura sword field directly, which made Guiwu Quangsha even more worried. "Lord Guiwu, please believe me." Nie Tian laughed, then said to Gongsun Shing, "Lord Divine Sword, I've thought it through. Let's go now." "Brother Gongsun, since Nie Tian said so, we can't refuse. Let's bring him to the Shura sword field." Xian Zongfeng glanced at Nie Tian with a vicious look in his eyes, then looked at Gongsun Shing and said. Xian Zongfeng was already 100% sure that Nie Tian could not walk out of the Shura sword field alive, but the latter actually took the initiative to immediately participate in the Shura sword field, which was exactly what he wanted. "Brat, you could have lived for a few more days, but since you're in a hurry to die, don't blame me," Xian Zongfeng said coldly in his heart. "People from the Nie clan are really arrogant." Gongsun Shing smiled cold and said, "In that case, let's go to the Shura sword field now. I would like to see how a mere upper deity trash can pass the Shura sword field." Gongsun Shing felt that he had already made a big concession, but Nie Tian didn't appreciate it at all. Therefore, if Nie Tian died in the Ashura sword field, Gongsun Shing couldn't blame him. Then, they went straight to the Shura sword field in the Shenwu city. The reason why the Azura sword field was named Azura was because once one stepped onto the sword field, it would be a battle of life and death. Neither side would win or lose, only life and death would be decided. The initial purpose of the Shura grounds was to select talents for the Shenwu Sword Pagoda. The Evil Edge Sword Duel was held once every 30,000 years, which was too long. The Shenwu Sword Pagoda had to recruit new swordsmen during this period. In the beginning, the Shura sword field did not require a duel to the death, but they realized that there were too many swordsmen participating, so they changed the rules to a duel to the death. Anyone who stepped into the Shura sword field would either die or die. At first, the Shura sword field did not require a duel to the death. However, it was later discovered that there were too many swordsmen participating in the Shura sword field, so the rules were changed to a duel to the death. Most of the people who came to the divine martial city came for the Ashura sword field. There were all kinds of swordsmen, young masters of influential families, desperados, lone swordsmen, and all kinds of people. But no matter who you were, once you stepped into the Shura sword field, you would be a Shura swordsman. Life and death would be decided by fate. The rules of the Shura sword field were simple. Winning 10 matches in a row would count as a pass. Once you passed, you could join the Shunwu sword pagoda. The rules of the Shura sword field were very simple. Winning 10 matches in a row would count as a pass. Once you passed, you could join the Shunwu sword pagoda. Gong Sun Xing and the others went to the VIP room backstage to avoid causing a commotion. The view was very wide, and they could see the entire Shura sword field. The Shura sword field was tens of thousands of meters wide, and it was an open-air field. Swordsmen could fight in the air. Right now, there were 2 swordsmen fighting to the death in the Shura sword field. Nie Tian's expression flickered the moment he sensed it with his divine sense. The 2 swordsmen were very strong. They were both early-stage paramount gods, and their cultivation had reached the level of selflessness. Are all the people who join the Shura sword field this strong? Nie Tian thought with a frown. Are you scared? Gong Sun Xing sneered when he noticed the change in Nie Tian's expression. Do I look scared? Nie Tian smiled confidently. Gong Sun Xing's expression darkened and he didn't say anything else. Xian Zongfeng glanced at Nie Tian and said, Brat, I'll let you be arrogant for now. You'll be crying later. Rumble. At this moment, in the sky above the Ashura sword field, 2 terrifying sword shadows collided, causing the space to tremble. A powerful sword wave that was visible to the naked eye spread out, followed by a badly mutilated figure directly exploding into a bloody light in the air. The fight between the 2 swordsmen ended. The winner stood in the air with an excited smile on his face. This was the 10th fight, and the winner would be qualified to join the divine martial sword pagoda. Then, a black-clothed judge appeared and announced that the winner had passed the test of the Shura sword field. The crowd roared like a tsunami. This was the first swordsman to pass the test in half a year, which was very rare. Meanwhile, in the VIP room, Gong Sun Xing glanced at Nie Tian cold and said, Kid from the Nie clan, you can go up now. Thanks for the reminder. Nie Tian smiled and stepped forward, ready to enter the Shura sword field. Kid. Gong Sun Xing's voice was heard again. Listen up, the Shura sword field is a place of life and death. Once you step in, there's no turning back. You either win 10 fights or die. I heard it very clearly. Thank you for the reminder, Divine Sword Master. Nie Tian smiled again, then looked up at Xian Zongfeng and saw a hint of slyness in the latter's eyes. Xian Zongfeng, you must have arranged everything in the Shura sword field. Nie Tian smiled cold and said, I just don't know how strong the people you've arranged are. The condition to join the Shura sword field was proposed by Xian Zongfeng, so Nie Tian guessed that Xian Zongfeng must have set a bloody trap for him, waiting for him to fall into it. However, Nie Tian was not afraid. He had been to places like the forbidden grounds of the 9 infants and the realm of darkness. The Shura sword field could not scare him. Nie Tian, you must be careful. Guiwu Kuang Sha looked worried and called out to Nie Tian. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. Nie Tian smiled faintly, then moved and came to the Shura sword field. Nie Tian's appearance caused the quiet spectators' stand to boil up again. In the past, after a Shura battle, it would take a long time for the next challenger to appear. No one expected a new challenger to appear so soon. However, when everyone's gazes were focused on Nie Tian, a burst of ridiculing and disdainful laughter burst out. Chapter 1934. Nie Tian stood on the Ashura sword field, causing the crowd to roar with laughter. F***ck. Am I seeing things? This kid only has the strength of a high god? With such trash strength, is this kid here to be a joke? F*ck his grandma, this silver hair is really a high god trash. Did he come to the wrong place? Ha! A high god ant appearing in the Azura sword field is an insult to the Azura sword field. If this kid isn't killed in one move, I'm willing to cut off my head and let you guys kick it like a ball. God knows how many overgod martialists have died in the Azura sword field. This high god trash is either an idiot or a lunatic. Nie Tian stood on the sword field and heard everyone's words clearly. However, his expression didn't change at all, and he looked completely unperturbed. After experiencing so much, he did not care what others thought of him. You can look down on me or worship me. I Nie Tian am still Nie Tian. Nothing will change. This little brother is indeed a young talent. At such a young age, you are already at the peak of the high god realm. At this moment, the black-clothed referee in the sky spoke. He sneered and said, "What's more frightening is that this little brother's cultivation in swordsmanship has reached the realm of selflessness. It's really rare." The black-clothed referee's words were obviously praising Nie Tian. However, no matter how one listened to it, it was not pleasing to the ear. It made people feel weird and uncomfortable. Nie Tian suddenly raised his head to look at the black-clothed referee and said cold, "Let's begin." The black-clothed referee's eyes narrowed and his expression turned extremely ugly. He fiercely said two words, "Begin." "Ha! Let me kill this genius swordsman. A high god trash dares to step into the Azura sword field? He's courting death." As soon as the black-clothed referee's voice fell, a violent figure dashed out and landed heavily on the Azura sword field. A pair of cold eyes stared at Nie Tian and said, "Brat, don't worry. I'll give you a quick death. I'll kill you in one move. Slaughter this arrogant brat." The appearance of the burly swordsman immediately caused everyone to cry out in alarm. Everyone's gazes became dark and ruthless, anxiously wanting to see the scene of Nie Tian being insta-killed. Everyone was certain that Nie Tian would be instantly killed by the burly swordsman in front of them without any suspense. Nie Tian looked at the burly swordsman, and his lips twitched slightly. He said indifferently, "The strength of a mid-over-god and the essence of the sword. I really don't understand where you get the courage to stand in the Azura sword field with your strength." After saying that, Nie Tian's eyes were full of contempt. An opponent like this was beneath his notice. Nie Tian didn't even have the desire to draw his sword, let alone use the three great forbidden skills. "Smelly brat, are you looking down on me?" The burly swordsman's face was gloomy, and his eyes were as cold as ice, filled with cold, killing intent. One could imagine how angry he was at being mocked by a piece of high god trash. "Make your move," Nie Tian said indifferently, not bothering to waste any more time. "You're looking to die." The burly swordsman roared out. With a movement of his body, a black heavy sword appeared in his hand. He leapt up and wielded the sword with both hands, swinging it viciously at Nie Tian. Bang! In the next moment there was a muffled sound in the air, and a figure was sent flying. The figure suddenly trembled mid-air, directly exploding into a bloody mist. Everyone's eyes suddenly trembled. When they looked over, there was only one figure left standing in the Azura sword field. It was Nie Tian. The burly swordsman had actually been killed by Nie Tian in a single move. He was unable to fight back at all, and he did not even have the time to cry out. In the blink of an eye, the Azura sword field became deathly silent. Countless gazes were fixed on Nie Tian, and the shock on their faces could not be any greater. The crowd finally reacted quite a while later, and all sorts of strange cries rang out. How is this possible? Are my eyes playing tricks on me? Why didn't I see him draw his sword? That silver-haired kid didn't draw his sword at all. He used sword intent to kill his opponent instantly. Instant kill with sword intent? That's impossible. That's impossible. That kid is only a greater god, so it's impossible for him to kill a mid-over-god swordsman instantly with sword intent alone. Everyone was shocked. They could not believe what they had just seen. Gongsun Xingji's face sank in the VIP lounge. His huge body trembled slightly as terrifying flames of fury surged in his eyes. Clearly, he was shocked by what he had just seen as well. He had never seen Nie Tian fight before, so he did not have a full understanding of Nie Tian's strength. He only knew that Nie Tian's martial body was unimaginably tough, but he had never thought that Nie Tian's sword intent would be so powerful as well. An expert like Gongsun Xingji could obviously see how Nie Tian had killed his opponent. He had indeed not drawn his sword. He had killed his opponent instantly with sword intent alone. This kid's sword intent is so strange. It seems to contain several types of energy that can fuse perfectly. His sword intent is so powerful that it's unparalleled among swordsmen of the same level. Gongsun Xingji was shocked. He said, "This kid isn't too powerful right now. Once he matures, he'll definitely become an extremely terrifying swordsman." He even felt that Nie Tian's sword intent was even more powerful than some swordsmen who had fused their sword into one. It was truly terrifying. Xian Zongfeng's expression was not too good either. He could sense that Nie Tian's strength had increased by quite a lot. He thought to himself, "This brat is too terrifying." When he first came to the divine martial city, he was only a late greater god and his way of the sword was only at sword essence. Now, in just 10 days, not only has his strength increased to the peak of greater god, even his way of the sword has reached the realm of selflessness. This speed of improvement is truly terrifying. Xian Zongfeng thought to himself. His face turned incomparably cold. His eyes were surging with chilling, killing intent. As a swordsman, he certainly understood how difficult it was to improve one's way of the sword. Nie Tian's speed of improvement was far beyond his expectations. Little did he know that the reason why Nie Tian could improve his way of the sword was thanks to his blood-sobbing nascent soul. If the demonic fiend god's energy did not devour the blood-sobbing nascent soul, Nie Tian's way of the sword would not have improved so quickly. Xian Zongfeng was the one to thank for Nie Tian's terrifying strength. The other person in the VIP lounge, Third Lady Gongsun, was also horrified. She obviously did not expect Nie Tian to be this terrifying. But Guiwu Guangsha, Jian Jingyun, and Guiwu Ken did not look optimistic. On the contrary, they were even more worried. They knew Nie Tian's strength. Therefore, they were not surprised by Nie Tian's performance at all. On the contrary, they were very worried. Nie Tian exposing his strength so early would undoubtedly make his opponents more cautious. This would be extremely disadvantageous to him in the following battles. Guiwu Guangsha had been secretly observing Xian Zongfeng. He could feel the killing intent in the latter's eyes. He guessed that Xian Zongfeng had most likely arranged a very terrifying opponent for Nie Tian. Chapter 1935. Countless gazes gathered on Nie Tian in the Azura sword field. Their eyes trembled in shock. Only now did everyone realize that the silver-haired cultivator before them was much more terrifying than they had imagined him to be. Nie Tian abruptly raised his head, swept his gaze across the crowd, and said coldly, "Who's next?" Everyone's eyes trembled when they heard his deep, cold voice. They actually felt fear. How arrogant! At this moment, a bellow rang out. Afterwards, a figure descended from the sky and landed before Nie Tian. He stared at Nie Tian calmly and growled, "Do you really think you're invincible just because you killed a piece of trash who's only a mid-overgod?" Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He stared at the person before him, and he could not help but smile coldly. His gaze was filled with disdain. The person was as skinny as a stick. He seemed like a skeleton as he stood there. He was a late overgod and had comprehended the essence of the sword. This strength was indeed much stronger than that of the previous martial artist. However, in front of Nie Tian, it was still trash. "I've never believed I'm invincible, but I'm more than enough to kill you," Nie Tianling glanced at the skinny man coldly and said with a venomous gaze. He really couldn't understand why these people with mediocre strength would be so arrogant and rush to their deaths. Brat, you're far too arrogant, the skinny man sneered. The lean man smiled coldly. He flipped his palm that was like a withered branch, and a slender sword appeared in his hand. The sword light was actually glowing with a dark green color, which looked extremely strange. Poison. Nie Tian glanced at it, and his lips curled up slightly. He could immediately tell that the person's sword actually contained poison. Brat, countless swordsmen have died to my jade water poison blade. You'll be next. An evil light flickered in the skinny man's eyes. His killing intent was extremely heavy. This person's sword spirit is actually poisonous. That brat's in danger. He'll definitely die from the sword chi. Yeah. The sword chi contains poison. It's not something that regular swordsmen can defend against. Although the silver-haired brat is arrogant, his talent is definitely not for show. It would be a pity if he were to die like this. Pity my ass. He's not strong enough, yet he still wants to challenge the Azura sword field. He's courting death, so he can't blame anyone else. The crowd discussed among themselves as they stared at Nie Tian and the skinny swordsman, looking forward to the moment when the two would clash. Stinking brat, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? The lean man looked at Nie Tian with a murderous look and provoked him. Are you sure you want me to make the first move? Nie Tian faintly smiled. Grandpa sees that you're from the younger generation, so I'll let you make the first move. Hurry up. The lean man laughed coldly, extremely insolent. Idiot. Nie Tian's lips twitched as his body quivered. Instantly, a ray of sword will shot out like the wind and lightning, fast to the extreme. Pooh! Just as he finished speaking, there was the sound of flesh being torn apart in the air. Before the lean man could react, his head flew into the air. His mouth was wide open, but no sound came out. Nie Tian's lips curled into a cold smile as he said coldly, "This is the price for letting me make the first move." The lean man was really looking for trouble with his life. If he let Nie Tian make the first move, he wouldn't even have the chance to make a move. The swordsman who was killed by Nie Tian in an instant had at least made a move, but this lean man died before he could even make a move. The bloody scene caused the entire Azura sword field to fall into dead silence once again. Countless eyes were trembling with horror. They couldn't believe the scene in front of them. Nie Tian's strength was far beyond their expectations. Hiss! After a long time, countless gasps were heard, followed by exclamations, "What a fast sword will! How can this kid's sword will be so fast?" If Nie Tian relied on the power of his sword will to kill his opponent in an instant in the first round, then in the second round, he relied on the speed of his sword will. It was because the speed was so fast that the lean man didn't even have time to react and died a horrible death. The lean man's Yuan Ling sword was highly toxic, and both his sword chi and sword will were highly toxic. If he had made a move, it might have even forced Nie Tian to use his sword. Once again, Nie Tian killed his opponent in an instant without even using his sword. In the VIP room, Gongsun Xing's huge body was trembling non-stop. His eyes were extremely strange, and he couldn't believe what had happened. "Brother Gongsun, are you okay?" Xian Zongfeng's reaction was very calm as he looked at Gongsun Xing and asked with concern. I'm fine." Gongsun Xing waved his hand and murmured, "The Nie kid's sword will is so terrifying. Not only is it powerful, but it's also very fast. I'm afraid no swordsman at the same level can have a stronger sword will than him." Third Lady Gongsun listened and couldn't help but nod. She was also a swordsman and had reached the intermediate level of sword and martial arts as one. Of course, she could see how terrifying Nie Tian's sword will was. "Brother Gongsun, Nie Tian's strength is far more than this." Xian Zongfeng let out a strange laugh and said, "When Nie Tian first came to the Shenwu city, the three devils of the North Sea provoked the Shunwu sword pagoda and attacked Wui. Wui wasn't a match for the three fierce ones of the North Sea, so it was Nie Tian who killed the second of the three fierce ones, Yang Lin, with a single sword strike. How is this possible? Gongsun Xing was taken aback. He gasped in shock and let out a strange cry. The three devils of the North Sea were famous swordsmen. Although they were far from peak swordsmen, they were still very powerful. According to Xian Zongfeng, Lian Wui was defeated by the three devils, and then Nie Tian appeared and killed one of the three devils, Yang Lin, in one move. If that was the case, then Nie Tian's strength was too monstrous. He was much stronger than Lian Wui. This news was so shocking that Gongsun Xing couldn't accept it. Lian Wui was the top genius of the Shunwu sword pagoda, and Gongsun Xing knew her strength very well. What Xian Zongfeng said was the truth, but he deliberately exaggerated Nie Tian's strength to increase Gongsun Xing's fear of Nie Tian. Swordmaster Wu, Nie Tian killed Yang Lin because the latter was injured by Miss Lian Wui and he underestimated her. That battle was not Nie Tian's true strength. Guiwu Kuang Sha stepped forward to explain. He was afraid that Gongsun Xing was too afraid of Nie Tian and had other ideas. Gongsun Xing's expression was very ugly. No matter how Guiwu Kuang Sha explained, he could tell that Nie Tian's strength was way beyond his expectations. If Nie Tian was weak, how would he dare to fight against the three devils of the North Sea? However, Gongsun Xing couldn't understand why Nie Tian was so powerful. Xian Zongfeng saw Gongsun Xing's reaction and said coldly, "Gongsun Xing, you should know by now that Nie Tian is a big threat. He can't be left alive." Chapter 1936. In the Azura sword field, Nie Tian once again used his sword intent to kill his opponent, which caused the atmosphere in the Azura sword field to become oppressive. Everyone's gaze towards him changed, from the previous ridicule and contempt, to shock and fear. Nie Tian's strength was too strong, too strange, making everyone feel that it was inconceivable. Nie Tian was indeed arrogant, but he had the capital to be arrogant. Who's next? Nie Tian raised his head again, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, and spoke coldly, revealing a cold, killing intent, making people shudder. "Let me." Just as he finished speaking, a stern voice sounded, and then a thin figure appeared, landing in front of Nie Tian like a ghost, staring at Nie Tian with a sinister gaze and said, "Stinking brat, let me experience your sword intent." Nie Tian looked at the opponent in front of him, and his gaze couldn't help but freeze. This person's stature was very short, only the stature of a 10-year-old child, not much taller than Sakura, but his appearance was shriveled and skinny, looking like an old man. Moreover, his ears were also pointed like a bat's. Nie Tian sensed for a moment this guy wasn't of any other race, but 100% human. He probably cultivated some evil arts to make his appearance like this. The appearance of this person caused a discussion in the spectator stands. Damn! What kind of monster is this? How did he grow like this, and he still dares to run out and scare people? Too much! Don't talk nonsense. He's the poison bat of the Thousand Evil sect. Can you afford to provoke him? The poison bat of the Thousand Evil sect is really evil. I heard that this guy likes to skin people alive. I wonder if it's true? Of course it's true. It's said that the poison bat can absorb blood chi and sword intent from other swordsmen. He skinned people alive to expose blood chi, and at the same time, not letting it leak out, for him to absorb. When Nie Tian heard the discussion of the crowd, he couldn't help but smile. It turned out that this guy with a strange figure was actually a famous figure. The Thousand Evil sect, this force was no stranger to Nie Tian. One of the three evils of the North Sea he killed was from the Thousand Evil sect. This strange poison bat in front of him was actually from the Thousand Evil sect. Nie Tian's divine sense swept over the poison bat, and he found that the latter's strength was at the peak of the Lord God realm, a swordsman in the realm of selflessness. This strength was the same as Jian Jingyun and Gui Wutsan, far more terrifying than the previous two swordsmen. Unfortunately, it was still unable to withstand a single blow from Nie Tian. Nie Tian looked at Poison Bat and smiled coldly. "You do look like a bat, Poison Bat from the Myriad Evil Sect. Poison Bat of the sect." The corner of Poisonous Bat's mouth twitched as he licked his lip. His eyes were bloodthirsty and fierce as he said, "Little bastard, do you think you're so powerful just because you killed two small fries? God you Tian, I sect, Saint Realm, I evil field, I will skin you, pull out your tendons, and slowly absorb your blood, chi, and sword intent. This is the first time I have enjoyed such a fresh swordsman." Nie Tian shook his head slightly, sneered, and said disdainfully, "Poison Bat, you are right, the two people I just killed were indeed small fries. But you are no exception, you will soon become the third small fries I kill." Arrogant. Poison Bat felt the disdain in Nie Tian's eyes. He could not help but let out a strange cry and roared, "Brat, don't look down on your master, Poison Bat. Your end will definitely be miserable." As soon as he finished speaking, Poison Bat's body flickered, and then he turned into a shadow, directly disappearing from where he stood. "Hey! Where is Poison Bat?" Seeing this scene, everyone cried out, not knowing what had happened. It was hard to imagine that Poison Bat actually disappeared in front of everyone. Nie Tian stood in the same place, with a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes were very calm. Of course, he knew that Poison Bat did not disappear, but used a speed that surpassed the human eye to hide. It had to be said that Poison Bat's speed was indeed very fast, and it was difficult for ordinary people to find him. But unfortunately, Nie Tian was a person who had the holographic divine rune, and he also had the starry sky eyes, so he knew everything within tens of thousands of meters of the Azura sword field like the back of his hand. It was simply a joke for Poison Bat to want to hide under his nose. Nie Tian stood motionless, and his divine sense had already firmly locked on Poison Bat. The latter's every move had been seen by him. "Little bastard, die." At this moment there was a strange cry in the void, and then 4 figures appeared in the air. All of them were Poison Bats, and they attacked Nie Tian from 4 different directions. Poison Bat condensed 3 doppelgangers, and together with his original body, they attacked at the same time, and all of them were sneak attacks, which made it impossible for Nie Tian to avoid. "It's over, that kid is dead." When the crowd saw this, their eyes trembled violently, as if they could already see the scene of Nie Tian being torn apart by the Poison Bat. But at this moment, Nie Tian stood in the same place with a very calm expression. There was no change on his face, and there was no fear at all. Boom! 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 The 4 Poison Bats attacked at the same time, and 4 sharp sword shadows attacked Nie Tian. They had the same aura and the same sword light, making it impossible to tell which was the real one. However, Nie Tian was as steady as a mountain, and he murmured, "The strength of a peak over God, and the realm of selflessness of the sword. You are qualified for me to use my sword." With that, Nie Tian's starlight heavenly slash appeared in his hand, and at the same time, a star soul flame appeared in his palm, directly fusing with the blade. Starflow devours the sky. In the next moment, Nie Tian stabbed out without hesitation, and the surging sword shadows attacked one of the Poison Bats. The sword intent was wild, and the killing intent was heavy. Rumble! Bang! The 2 swords collided, and the Poison Bat's sword shadows directly shattered. Afterwards there was a dull sound, and the Poison Bat was thrown into the air, falling heavily to the ground. At the same time, the other 3 Poison Bats directly shattered, turning into sword intent and disappearing. How is this possible? How did you know where my main body is? Bang! The Poison Bat landed on the ground and stabilized himself. His entire body was red and bloodshot, and he opened his mouth with difficulty. However, before he could finish his sentence, his body trembled, and he directly exploded into a bloody mist. The bloody scene made everyone's faces tremble. Their expressions froze, and they could not make a sound for a long time. The poison bat was dead. He had been killed by a single strike from Nie Tian. There was dead silence. Even though they had already been shocked twice, the third time was an unprecedented shock. The poison bat was far more powerful than the previous two, but he had still been killed by Nie Tian. Moreover, he had died cleanly and his death was extremely strange. Until his death, the poison bat did not understand how Nie Tian could react so quickly, and how Nie Tian could see where his main body was. Little did he know that his stealth movement technique was completely useless before Nie Tian. The senses of Nie Tian's soul had never left his main body. Chapter 1937. Nie Tian killing poison bat with one strike caused the entire Shura sword field to explode. What just happened? Did I see it wrong? That silver-haired kid killed poison bat from the all-evil sect with one strike. Poison bat is really dead, and he was killed by that kid with one strike. But what's going on? Poison bat had launched a sneak attack in the dark, and had even condensed 3 identical clones. How did this kid see through all of this? Also, isn't his reaction a little too fast? Is that kid even human? He's a monster. The crowd discussed loudly, and the entire Shura sword field was boiling. When Nie Tian entered the field, everyone looked at him with disdain, treating him like a clown. But now they knew that the real clown was themselves. Nie Tian attacked again and again, killing his opponent again and again, refreshing everyone's understanding of him. This kind of shock was even greater than watching a battle between overgod experts. No one would have thought that a superior god could actually bring so much shock to the crowd. At the same time, in the VIP lounge, Gong Sun Xing's old face was ashen and extremely gloomy. The stronger Nie Tian's strength was, the more flustered he became. He even felt that if the fight continued, Nie Tian might really pass the Shura sword field's test. Although it was ridiculous for a superior god to pass the Shura sword field's test, Gong Sun Xing was really worried about it. Although the 2 swordsmen that Nie Tian killed were shocking, their strength was really trash. Poison bat, on the other hand, had the strength of a peak overgod, and was in a state of selflessness. His martial arts and sword arts combined together could definitely fight an early superior god expert. But even as strong as Poison Bat was, he was still killed by Nie Tian with one strike. At this moment, Gong Sun Xing knew that Nie Tian not only had terrifying sword intent and speed, but his perception was also very terrifying. The reason why Nie Tian could kill Poison Bat was because of his superb perception. He had directly locked onto Poison Bat's body and killed him with one strike. Kid from the Nie clan, you're indeed a monster, Gong Sun Xing said in his heart, the sharpness in his eyes intensifying. At this moment, Xian Zongfeng's face did not look good either. He sneered and thought, Nie Tian, your strength is really strange. Looks like you're hiding a lot of secrets. No wonder you were able to swallow the blood-weeping sword nascent soul without the aura of a sword nascent soul. Xian Zongfeng faintly felt that there might be an extremely powerful figure behind Nie Tian, which made him a little fearful. But then, he thought that Nie Tian had died in the Shura sword field. It was an honorable death. Even if there was a big shot behind him, he would not be blamed on Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng thought too much. There was no big shot behind Nie Tian. If there was, it would be Fat Cat. Speaking of which, Fat Cat was indeed a big shot. In terms of knowledge, no one could be compared to Fat Cat. His only shortcoming was that he did not have any fighting strength. Besides Xian Zongfeng, Guiwu Guangsha and the others were also very shocked. Guiwu Guangsha originally thought that Nie Tian's biggest trump card was the Forbidden Rune. When Poison Bat appeared, he thought that Nie Tian would definitely use the Forbidden Rune. But who would have thought that Nie Tian did not even use the Forbidden Rune and killed Poison Bat with one strike? His fighting strength was so strong that it made people's hair stand on end. In this way, Guiwu Guangsha's confidence in Nie Tian had greatly increased. He believed that as long as the next opponent was not too strong, Nie Tian would be able to handle it. Just as Guiwu Guangsha and the others were pondering, in another VIP lounge, a pair of cold eyes were firmly staring at Nie Tian. The eyes were surging with a strange divine light. It was a man wearing a devil mask. His whole body was surging with green mist. He looked at Nie Tian and the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. He actually laughed and murmured, "This is the person I want to kill. His strength is a little strange, but he is too weak. I don't have the desire to attack." Behind the devil mask stood a green-clothed woman. Her beautiful eyes flickered and she said, "Lian Ru, this is the person that His Excellency wants to kill. You must not underestimate him. I always feel that he has a stronger trump card that he has yet to reveal." "Lvinger, are you doubting my ability?" Lian Ru laughed. Her gloomy eyes stared at Nie Tian and said disdainfully, "I, Lian Ru, am one of the dignified 13 reverse-scale thorns. If I can't even kill a mere high god trash, wouldn't I be a laughing-stock?" Reverse scale, Lian Ru revealed his identity. He and the woman named Lu Inger were assassins from reverse scale. Nie Tian had come into contact with reverse scale a long time ago. It was a very frightening organization. It was said that they specialized in stealing people's bloodline power. They were extremely evil. Net Above and Earth, Reverse Scale, and Thousand Feathers Pavilion were the three most secretive organizations in the 9 major realms. Nie Tian had dealings with all of them. It was surprising that an assassin from Reverse Scale would appear here. "Lian Ru, I advise you to be careful. This guy named Nie Tian is definitely not an ordinary warrior. I can sense a very frightening power in him." Lu Inger warned Lian Ru. "Don't scare yourself." Lian Ru wore a disdainful look. "No matter how strange he is, he only has the strength of a high god. All he relied on was his cultivation in the sword Tao. I'm a swordsman at the unity of sword and martial, and I also have the strength of an early-stage paramount god. Unless this kid is a swordsman at the legendary unity of sword and martial, I'll definitely kill him with one strike." Lian Ru was very arrogant because he had the right to be so. He had carried out 108 assassination missions and had never failed once. He had killed countless geniuses, many of whom were paramount gods. Therefore, he didn't care about a high god like Nie Tian. Lian Ru even felt that it would be an insult to his strength to kill Nie Tian. However, the assassination order came from a big shot, so Lian Ru had no right to refuse. He could only carry it out. Lu Inger looked at Lian Ru and frowned slightly. She couldn't help but shake her head. She didn't know why, but she had a bad feeling in her heart. The more she sensed Nie Tian's strength, the stronger the feeling became. "Who's next?" At this moment, Nie Tian's voice rang out in the Shura sword field again. His expression was calm and his eyes carried a hint of provocation. He gave off an extremely arrogant feeling. Nie Tian's voice fell, but there was no response for a long time. After the previous 3 battles, people had realized how terrifying Nie Tian was, so they didn't dare to rashly enter the field again. "A bunch of trash, let me do it." After a moment of dead silence, a voice that sounded like muffled thunder rang out in the Shura sword field. Immediately, a huge figure appeared and crashed into the Shura sword field. It was like a boulder falling to the ground, causing a huge wave of dirt to rise into the sky. Chapter 1938. In the Azura sword field, the 3-meter-tall, iron tower-like brawny man appeared in front of Nie Tian, releasing a roaring aura around him, making him look like a wild beast, violent. "Who the hell are you?" Nie Tian looked at the towering giant in front of him with no fear in his eyes. He just asked with a faint smile. "Brat, I'm Tai Tu of the 10,000 Evil Sect." Tai Tu roared out furiously. His voice was like thunder as his presence surged. He was extremely ferocious. "Another person from the 10,000 Evil Sect." Nie Tian's eyes narrowed slightly. He sneered. You people from the 10,000 evil sect sure are interesting. You're sending yourselves to your deaths one after another. Brat, you're so arrogant, Tai-Tu roared out furiously. His thunderous voice boomed out and he said, Do you know who that poison bat you just killed is? He's my underling. Before Nye Tian could speak, Tai-Tu roared out, That brat poison bat was too weak. He was killed by you. As his elder brother, I must avenge him today. Nye Tian was stunned. He had never thought that Tai-Tu and Poison Bat would know each other. It seemed like the two of them were quite close. However, Nye Tian did not see any sorrow on Tai-Tu's face at all. There was only violent killing intent. Tai-Tu called himself Poison Bat's elder brother, but his strength was the same as Poison Bat's. They were both peak over gods and had reached the realm of selflessness. Nye Tian was rather curious about what Tai-Tu's sword looked like with his size. At this moment, Tai-Tu's appearance caused a disturbance in the spectator stands. They all began discussing. Another person from the 10,000 evil sect. He's built like a bear, but he's not much stronger than Poison Bat. He'll probably be killed instantly by that silver-haired brat again. Yeah. Tai-Tu seems very powerful, but he's actually just an empty shell. He looks impressive, but he's useless. The swordsmen of the 10,000 evil sect are all extremely exquisite, but they're not that strong. For Poison Bat and Tai-Tu to run into this silver-haired brat, they really have 8 lifetimes of bad luck. The crowd continued to discuss among themselves. This time, they were all on Nye Tian's side, believing that Nye Tian could kill Tai-Tu with a single strike. Nye Tian couldn't help but shake his head when he heard what everyone said. To be honest, he did not have the confidence to kill Tai-Tu in one strike. Although Tai-Tu and Poison Bat's strength was the same, Nye Tian could feel that Tai-Tu's martial body was several levels higher than Poison Bat's. The Poison Bat was good at ambushing and assassinating. It was very fast, but its martial body was not strong. Therefore, as long as Nye Tian locked on to Poison Bat, he would be able to kill him instantly. Tai-Tu, on the other hand, was different. It was obvious that he was the kind of guy who liked to fight head-on. His martial body was much stronger than other warriors of the same level. If Nye Tian wanted to instantly kill Tai-Tu, he would have to use the 3 forbidden techniques. However, he had no intention of using the forbidden techniques now because he knew that the real experts had yet to come. The 3 forbidden techniques were reserved for those guys. Facing Tai-Tu, Nye Tian was still prepared to use his current strength to kill him. He would not use the 3 forbidden techniques. Little brat, are you not going to make a move because you want me to make the first move? Tai-Tu stared at Nye Tian with his wolf-like eyes and said with a sinister expression, It's not wise to let me make the first move. Nye Tian's lips curled into a cold smile. When the crowd saw this, they couldn't help but think of the second swordsman who was instantly killed by Nye Tian. The second swordsman had let Nye Tian make the first move. In the end, he didn't even have the chance to make the first move before he died. Now that Tai-Tu had let Nye Tian make the first move, it was a provocation. Courting death. Sensing the disdain in Nye Tian's eyes, Tai-Tu couldn't help but let out a furious roar. Then, he stretched out one of his huge arms, and a huge, pitch-black sword appeared in his hand. Sword intent gushed out of the sword as it slashed towards Nye Tian. Boom! The sword intent was majestic, like the mountains and the seas. When the sword chi burst forth, it was extremely swift and fierce. Nye Tian was slightly taken aback, after which, a pair of astral soul wings appeared on his back. Lightly stepping on the ground, he agilely dodged Tai-Tu's attack. Rumble! Tai-Tu's sword missed. The huge pitch-black sword shadow slashed the ground, causing the entire Azura sword field to tremble. A terrifying crater appeared on the ground. The Azura sword field was reinforced by a sword formation. Tai-Tu's sword strike was able to split the ground. This was enough to show how strong his strength was. Dark Star Ghost Kill. At the same time, Nie Tian's body was in midair. The corners of his mouth twitched as he stabbed out with his sword. A sword intent that was as swift as the wind and as fast as lightning abruptly shot out. However, this sword intent was hidden in the air, invisible and formless. Puff! Before Tai Tu could react, he felt his shoulder sink. A bloody hole appeared and blood spurted out. Dark Star Ghost Kill was an assassination technique of the Starry Sky ancient martial art. Nie Tian hadn't used it for a long time. Now that he used it, it was quite effective. This guy's martial body is really strong. He's actually fine after taking the power of the Dark Star Ghost Kill head-on. Nie Tian's sword fell as he looked at Tai Tu with a heavy gaze. The strength of Tai Tu's martial body was even more terrifying than he had imagined. Little bastard, how dare you sneak attack your uncle Tai Tu? Tai Tu's shoulder was injured, but he didn't care about it at all. With a roar, he fiercely stomped on the ground and soared into the sky. His sword swept out wildly towards Nie Tian. Nie Tian's figure was incomparably agile. The wings on his back flapped and he easily dodged Tai Tu's attack. Then, he stabbed out with his sword again. Another wound appeared on Tai Tu's body. Damn it! Tai Tu roared furiously like a berserk beast. His bell-like eyes turned red and bloodshot as he waved the black heavy sword in his hand non-stop. Streaks of terrifying sword shadows whistled through the air, causing the entire Azura sword field to shake slightly. However, Nie Tian's figure was very strange. It was erratic as he shuttled through the endless sword shadows with ease. The crowd was dazzled. Before they could react, they saw that Tai Tu had already become a bloody man. His whole body was dripping with blood as he stood in the air. Damn bastard, do you only know how to King dodge? Tai Tu was completely infuriated by Nie Tian. He was about to go crazy. Nie Tian's figure froze as he coldly stared at Tai Tuesday. He chuckled and said, "All right, this battle is over." When Tai Tu heard the word "over" from Nie Tian, he couldn't help but be stunned. Before he could react, he saw Nie Tian's figure flying straight at him like an arrow leaving the bow. Before Tai Tu could react, he suddenly felt a huge impact on his divine sense. He let out a strange cry as he lost control of his mind. His eyes became dull in an instant. One sword, kill. Nie Tian's figure was like lightning as he slashed out with his sword. A stream of sword shadows appeared and fell towards Tai Tu like a pouring waterfall. Puff! In the next moment, the sound of flesh tearing rang out. In a flash of blood, Tai Tu's huge body was split in half from the middle. This incomparably bloody scene drew an end to the battle. Chapter 1939. The Shura sword field was in chaos. Everyone looked at Nie Tian in horror, their eyes trembling. Not only was Nie Tian terrifyingly strong, but his attacks were also ruthless and decisive, not giving his opponents any chance to escape. Such a person was indeed terrifying. In the VIP lounge, Gong Sun Xing's fat body trembled even more visibly. He was very surprised. That kid from the Nie family is a peerless genius in both strength and talent, but his battle talent is also so terrifying. The guy called Tai Tu has a very strong martial body. If they were to fight head-on, the kid from the Nie family might not be his match. But this kid used tactics. First, he angered Tai Tu, then when the latter was at his most furious, he used a spiritual attack and killed him in the end. All of this was done in one go. He killed a powerful opponent with the least loss of power. Kid from the Nie family, you are really not simple. Over and over again, Gong Sun Xing was shocked by Nie Tian. He had never expected that Nie Tian could use psychic attacks, not to mention that he had executed them perfectly and killed Tai Tu with a single strike at the most critical moment. Gong Sun Xing had to admit that Nie Tian had indeed used a psychic attack to kill Tai Tuesday. Tai Tu had been in a delirious state before he had died. If Nie Tian fought head-on without activating the three forbidden skills, he might not be a match for Tai Tuesday. After all, Tai Tu's strength was a realm higher than his, and his martial body was extremely strong. Spiritual attack. Nye Tian, how many more trump cards do you have? Xian Zongfeng's face was filled with horror, and he roared in his heart. He was even a little worried that Nye Tian still had a very powerful trump card that he had not used. Thinking of this, Xian Zongfeng's eyes flickered. He then looked at the VIP room opposite him and said in his heart, Lien Ru, you are one of the 13 reverse scale thorns. Killing Nye Tian shouldn't be a problem. I hope you won't let me down. Lien Ru, the reverse scale killer, was secretly arranged by Xian Zongfeng. This person was the true obstacle in Nye Tian's path to the Azura sword field. At this moment, Gui Wu Kuangsha's complexion had turned much better, as he knew that Nye Tian had yet to use his 3 great forbidden techniques. Once he did so, the latter's combat prowess would increase by several levels. It looked like Nye Tian was already very confident in passing the sword grounds. Gui Wu Kuangsha did not expect that Nye Tian would actually have such a rapid increase in his strength in just a few days, causing him to be shocked. Nye Tian, no wonder you're so confident. It turns out that your strength is already so terrifying. Gui Wu Kuangsha thought to himself, the corners of his mouth involuntarily curling up. At the same time, in another VIP room, the forbidden scale assassin Lu Yinger's expression was ugly. Her delicate features were scrunched together. She looked at Lien Ru and said, Lien Ru, did you see that? Nye Tian's strength is much more terrifying than you can imagine. This mission is not that simple. Lien Ru's expression changed slightly. It was obvious that he was quite surprised, but he immediately sneered and said, I admit that this kid called Nye Tian is indeed very strange. Not only is he first-rate in martial arts, but his combat prowess is also very terrifying. But I still have to say that his strength is too weak. The people he killed were all small fries with no combat prowess at all. If he meets me, I guarantee that I will kill him with a single sword strike. Lien Ru's eyes were filled with killing intent. He was very calm and also very disdainful. Until now, he still did not change the way he thought. He still regarded Nye Tian as an ant that could be killed at any time. Lu Yinger's beautiful eyes flickered. She sighed softly and did not speak anymore. Who's next? On the Azura sword field, Nye Tian spoke again. His eyes were extremely cold. He had said the same words several times, but each time it was more and more powerful. After 4 consecutive victories, Nye Tian's strength had been proven. As soon as his voice fell, the Azura sword field fell into a dead silence. No one responded for a long time. What's wrong? You swordsmen who usually think highly of yourselves, are you scared by a high god? At this moment, the black-clothed referee's voice sounded. It was full of mockery. It was obvious that he was provoking the others. All right, let me do it. As expected, someone could not bear it any longer. With a roar, he flew over and appeared directly in front of Nye Tian. It was a black-clothed swordsman. His body was full of murderous intent. His eyes were extremely cold. One look and anyone could tell that he was a cruel and bloodthirsty person. A superior god expert. Nye Tian looked at this person and could not help but tremble. Finally, he had met an opponent with strength that was passable. That guy is a superior god expert. The appearance of the black-clothed swordsman caused the crowd to become restless. Everyone's eyes were filled with anticipation. A superior god martial artist against a superior god martial artist. The disparity in strength between the two was so great that it made people feel very nervous. By now, everyone knew that Nye Tian was not an ordinary superior god martial artist. His strength had exceeded everyone's understanding of martial arts. They could not treat him as a normal person. Kill! The black-clothed swordsman did not say a word. With a low roar, he moved and attacked Nye Tian. Nye Tian frowned slightly. The astral soul wings appeared on his back. He stepped forward and stabbed out with his sword. At the same time, the sword nascent soul whizzed out. Rumble! In midair, the two sword shadows collided with each other. A violent sword wave spread out in all directions. Bang! Immediately after, a muffled sound rang out. Nietion's figure was forced back again and again. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Nietion was injured. The black-clothed swordsman was very strong. He had the strength of an early-stage superior god. Coupled with the realm of the sword, he was extremely terrifying. Without using the three forbidden skills, Nietion was no match for this person. The black-clothed swordsman was faster than Poison Bat and stronger than Tai Tuesday. He was a very difficult opponent to deal with. Damn, that kid is done for! The crowd could not help but cry out when they saw that Nietion was injured. Their eyes were filled with shock. Nietion steadied himself and stood in midair. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and smiled bitterly. A superior god martial artist is indeed far superior to an over-god martial artist. A superior god martial artist was a martial artist who had comprehended a superior Tao intent. Every attack of theirs contained the power of Tao intent. The power of Tao intent was a very mysterious power. It could increase the power of a martial artist's attack by several times. Oh! The black-clothed swordsman could not help but be stunned when he saw that Nietion was still alive. His face sank and he roared again, "Die!" With that, the black-clothed swordsman struck out with his sword. A huge sword shadow appeared, carrying with it a tremendous amount of power as it flew toward Nietion. At that moment, everyone's hearts clenched. They could almost see the scene of Nietion being killed. Nietion stood in the air. His body trembled slightly, and strange runes of forbidden skills surged out and covered him. Chapter 1940. What a powerful sword move! In the Azura sword field, everyone felt a powerful pressure from the sword. Their eyes couldn't help but tremble as they cried out, "Boom!" At the same time, the mighty blurs of the sword fell from the sky above the Azura sword field. The surroundings seemed to collapse as the space trembled. The swordsman in black was unable to react at all. He was directly swallowed by the blurs of the sword. Not even his corpse remained. The sudden scene caused the entire Azura sword field to fall into a deathly silence. Everyone's eyes trembled. They could not believe what they had just seen. Nietion, who was originally at an absolute disadvantage, had suddenly exploded in strength, killing the swordsman in black in a single stroke. This scene was too strange, and it was impossible for anyone to believe it. How did he become a peak-over god? After a moment of silence, someone finally returned to their senses. They cried out in shock as if they had seen a ghost. His strength has increased by a major realm. How is that possible? The others cried out. They were completely stunned. They had not seen wrongly. Nietion's strength had indeed increased by a major realm, going from peak high god to peak over god. My battle prowess has actually become so powerful after my comprehension of the laws of the sword increased. Nietion's eyes narrowed slightly, and he could not help but smile. He had never thought that the attack earlier would be so powerful, directly killing the swordsman in black. If he had known that the attack would be so powerful, Nietion would not have used the three forbidden technique. Impossible! In the VIP lounge, Gongsun Xing sprang to his feet and let out a strange cry, a look of shock on his face. It was fortunate that the VIP room had a soundproof sword formation, or other people would definitely be frightened if they heard Gongsun Xingji's cry. The mighty master of the divine sword, the greatest swordsman of the 9 regions, had actually been shocked to such an extent. It was not something fun at all. Xian Zongfeng was also shocked. His eyes trembled. Clearly, he had not expected Nietion to be so powerful. The strength that Nietion had displayed before was already unbelievable, but the battle prowess he displayed right now had completely exceeded everyone's imagination. On the other hand, Guiwu Guangsha and the others were already aware of Nie Tian's trump card. Therefore, they weren't too surprised. In another VIP room, the two forbidden scale assassins, Lu Yinger and Lian Ru, were also dumbfounded. They were speechless for a long time. If the strength that Nie Tian had displayed just now had not amazed Lian Ru, then his current strength was enough to shock and even make her fearful. Lian Ru didn't care about Nie Tian, who had the power of a peak high god. However, the peak over god Nie Tian made him feel pressured. Old 5. At that moment, a few howls suddenly rang out on the Azura sword field, and then 3 figures appeared. All of them were filled with grief and anger. Their furious eyes locked onto Nie Tian, and they wanted to skin him alive. Nie Tian narrowed his eyes and looked at the 3 swordsmen. Their strength was not any weaker than the black-robed swordsmen from before. They should be the brothers of the black-robed swordsman. Ah! Just as Nie Tian raised his head, one of the swordsmen let out a strange cry and then roared, "Second brother, this brat killed 5th brother. Let's attack together and avenge 5th brother." Avenge 5th brother! The other swordsman also let out a strange cry. Then, he moved and directly stabbed his sword towards Nie Tian. As soon as this swordsman moved, the other 2 also moved. The 3 of them actually launched attacks at the same time. Like 3 flood dragons, 3 sword shadows surged down from the sky and merged into one as they slashed towards Nie Tian. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The crowd could not help but gasp when they realized what was going on. Their gazes became strange and shocked. The 3 of them attacked Nie Tian at the same time. This was something that had never happened in the Azura sword field before. The Azura sword field had always been a one-on-one battle. How could there be 3 people attacking at the same time? However, the black-robed referee did not stop them. Instead, he gloomily looked at Nie Tian, his eyes extremely vicious. The black-robed referee was a late-stage paramount god. If he wanted to stop them, the 3 swordsmen would not have a chance to do anything. However, he clearly wanted to kill Nie Tian, so he would not save him. Even if the 3 swordsmen broke the Azura sword field's rules, he did not care. Nie Tian glanced at the black-robed referee and saw the latter's vicious eyes. He immediately understood that the latter must have been arranged by Xian Zongfeng. Xian Zongfeng was really cautious. In order to kill Nie Tian, he even arranged for the Azura sword field's referee to be someone he had arranged. If that's the case, then let them come at me together. Nie Tian's eyes trembled. It was not fear that was revealed, but incomparably fierce battle intent. He wanted to see just what level his battle prowess had reached, and these 3 swordsmen working together was exactly what he wanted. Sword Dragon devours the world. Feeling the powerful impact coming from above, Nie Tian did not dare to be careless. With a low roar, a violent blood chi surged from his body. The sword sealing restriction formation was activated, and the extremely terrifying sword intent became even more violent under the stimulation of the sword formation. Roar! In the next moment, the endless sword intent of the formation gathered together, and a sword dragon that was close to 10,000 meters long appeared. It roared at the sky, and its angry roar resounded in the space. At this moment, everyone felt their hearts tremble, and their eyes were filled with shock. They simply couldn't believe the scene before their eyes. The sword dragon was too terrifying. The dragon chi was monstrous, and the power of the dragon shook the world, as if it was going to destroy everything. Boom! The body of the sword dragon rolled up, and the terrifying dragon chi and sword intent mixed together, and the space was about to be torn apart. Rumble! Immediately after, under the gazes of countless people, the sword dragon and the sword shadow in the sky collided. The space seemed to have stopped for a moment, and then an endless amount of violent energy exploded, wreaking havoc in the space, and ear-piercing sounds rang out unceasingly. Roar! In the next moment, the earth-shattering roar of the dragon rang out again, and the sword shadow in the sky couldn't withstand it any longer. It collapsed, and then 3 miserable shrieks rang out. The figures of the 3 swordsmen were drowned in the mighty dragon chi, and not even their bones were left. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on the sky, and they were so shocked that they couldn't react for a long time. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that Nye Tian could kill 3 early-stage Paramount God swordsmen with a single sword strike. 3 early-stage Paramount God swordsmen working together was enough to make a mid-stage Paramount God feel threatened. Nye Tian, a mere high god, had killed 3 Paramount Gods with a single sword strike. The shock was indescribable. How is this possible? Up in the sky, the black-clothed referee was the first to react. He cried out in shock, and his cold eyes were filled with astonishment and shock. His expression was uglier than if he had eaten shit.